requirement for the majority of your districts now. We are also proposing a lot area per dwelling unit, a minimum. And please note that in the R1, that lot area per dwelling unit should be 8,000, not 4,000, please.
The duplexes are a limited use.
In the R1, so
Is it 4,000?
and I think that's a great question for this group is the R1 appropriate for duplexes moving forward? And if so, should the lot area be reflective of the lot area for a single family detached home for each of the units, or should there be allowed a duplex on that lot that would have that single family detached home? So the idea with the lot area per dwelling unit is that in the districts where we are allowing higher density housing, so duplexes, townhomes, row homes, we still want to accommodate those within the districts in a more seamless way, but we want to ensure that everyone has enough land area. We're not really cramming in a bunch of housing without having, having too much density. So in the R2 district, the minimum lot size is 5,000 square feet for a single family detached property. If I wanted to come in with a duplex, the minimum lot area per dwelling unit is 3,000 square feet. So my minimum lot size would be 6,000 square feet, and it would go up from there based on the number of units. Now for the yard setbacks, we are proposing a reduction in some of the yard setbacks to ensure that with the reduced lot size, there's still enough buildable area on the lot. We don't want to make all those setbacks so deep that there's the window for development is too small. In the districts R2, R3, and R4 and the MH, where it's 15 feet, and in R1 where it's 20 feet, we're proposing that the garage be required to be set back 25 feet from the lot line. So there's sufficient space for you to park your vehicle in your driveway without overhanging on the sidewalk. Any questions on the residential district bulk dimensional standards?
Are these pretty much standard for towns our size or into Bellevue, Pavilion, with Vista? Are these pretty much standard for them too?
I don't know about neighboring communities, but they're definitely standard for the development Fremont has currently. So the lot area and lot width, those numbers are based on our assessment of your current lots. The setbacks are also based on a rough assessment of your current development. That's more difficult to do because building footprint data isn't always accurate. So it's not always accurately placed on the lot, but through some Google Street View work, we were able to determine some of these. And a lot of the setbacks aren't too far off from what you have currently. And then for the height, building coverage, and impervious surface coverage, the standards are pretty equivalent to what you have currently.
I just don't want to make it too strict for us that we can't build apartments or anything because everything's so defined that we can't.
I think that what's proposed here is a good balance. So I think it really helps to balance some concerns that we were hearing about over densifying the community with the concerns we were hearing about needing more housing, needing more attainable housing. So I think we're hoping that this really, is that balance. But we're very welcome to your thoughts and ideas on perhaps what area might specifically not work. Jennifer's got a.
I would point out that the lot area per unit in the R3 and the R4 for the multifamily is higher than currently required in SR or the AR and the UR, which are really pretty dense the way it's written today. So this provides more area, more open space in those multifamily area that we've talked about a lot.
Are these the setbacks to kind of accommodate the old neighborhoods and stuff like that? Is that what they're doing?
Yes, great question. So we do have some new averaging standards for those neighborhoods that are more historic, may have the more variable development pattern. We heard that from you all at the beginning of the process that there's some difficulty in those neighborhoods and meeting the standards we have currently because things are just so different. So we are proposing some averaging standards so that it makes it easier in those neighborhoods. And we'll go over those in just a little bit.
I know Deb and I have talked about this in the past. We have neighborhoods, like talking the old neighborhoods here in Fremont. Let's say I have some kind of disaster with this property, so I want to maybe rebuild what I had, and it's like, hey, now you can't do it because we changed the code on you. but it actually fit the neighborhood. And I don't know if that could be done so that we don't restrict those kind of rebuilt if we do have such a thing. Now, there's other things that need to be cleaned up. I understand that too, but you know, there's a challenge in there in that whole regard.
Definitely. So our goal with these new standards is to bring as much into conformity as possible, so that if something burns down, let's say they're able to rebuild. That it's not going to capture every instance though. We don't want to loosen the standards so much that we're really changing the character of neighborhoods over time. But we are hoping to bring as many properties into conformity as possible so that situation's minimized.
Good.
And I'm assuming then, since you used average statistics for some of this based on our current code, in comparison to historic Fremont, where lot sizes in many respects, I think, were larger than much of western Fremont, even though their homes might not, they have lots of yard
Right.
space. New doesn't in many respects have that. And so your statistical minimums are average blending those together, or you somehow took into account old versus new?
So the way
establishing-
the assessment, so it starts off with looking at the minimum requirements within the current code and determines the number of properties that don't comply with those standards. So they're less than those minimums. And then we test new standards to try and find the number that would bring the most properties into conformity as possible. Then once we have those various numbers, we test for new opportunities for subdivision to see if by decreasing the lot area or decreasing the lot width, there would be new opportunities for subdivision that would really change the character of neighborhoods. So those larger lots, a lot of instances that we found, they were deeper rather than wider. So they wouldn't be able to subdivide based on the lot width requirements. So those would remain as they are currently. They would be conforming, but they wouldn't be able to be subdivided and then change the character of the area.
Part of that is not just to the question about disaster, being able to rebuild, it's what do you do if you need to infill? You have areas where you want to infill, and these are the new rules. And
Yes.
we want to make sure that we can do it.
Certainly. So on one of those larger lots, let's say it's in the R2 district and it's a 9,000 square foot lot. And they want to tear it down, they could have the potential of building a 3-unit building on that lot because it's larger and it would still fit within the current standards. All right, so moving into the mixed use and non-residential district bulk and dimensional standards. So you'll notice the lot area minimum requirement for all of the districts except for the agricultural district are proposed to be eliminated. But we're proposing to keep a lot width minimum of 50 feet. So that will ensure there's adequate access to these parcels, but will allow for a greater variety of development in your commercial corridors. So let's say along 23rd Street, where we have the larger kind of strip shopping centers kind of in the back of the lot, this would open up the opportunity for smaller outlots to be subdivided. So we have more of that commercial opportunity along the corridor. Now for the yard setbacks, we're proposing to lessen the front yard setback minimum requirement for the neighborhood commercial and general commercial districts. They are remaining the same for our light industrial and general industrial districts, as well as the ag district. Now for the neighborhood commercial and general commercial districts, we are proposing a maximum front yard setback of 20 feet and 30 feet. So we did want to discuss with you all the front yard maximum in the general commercial district. So what this would do is restrict parking in the front of buildings. We're trying to encourage parking in the rear of buildings, to the sides of buildings, but want to get your input on whether that should be something that is incentivized through, let's say, reductions in landscaping in your parking lot if it's in the rear versus the front, or if that's something that should be required in this maximum setback.
My question, you thinking on that, we're taking the brand new Walmart, the way their stores were built, pretty much standard across the country, I think. The front door is on the front of the parking lot where citizens walk today. For example, I take my groceries out of that cart goes out and whatever in the front. Deliveries for those stores, I believe, were maybe brought to the back of the store. So I don't know how that works, and that if you flip that or what you're thinking here.
Okay.
For deliveries then? Or how does that work? If you take parking to the opposite side of the building?
So yes, the deliveries, kind of the service and loading area would be to the side of the building, parking to the other side
To
of the
the
building.
rear?
Yeah. There's lots of formats for how to accommodate both the service areas and the parking. But in a lot of communities where we're hoping to see more buildings pushed up closer to the sidewalk, closer to the right of way, to avoid those seas of parking that you see from the street. They are establishing that front yard maximum. Other communities though, where we, especially in the 23rd Street corridor type areas, are incentivizing the parking being located in other locations by requiring things like lesser landscaping or allowing more height or that type of thing, incentivizing rather than requiring. Any other thoughts on whether it should be required or incentivized?
I guess trying to think the pattern of driving to the store. And I guess I look at the businesses that are in the area of Applebee's, let's say an example.
Mhm.
So those stores that sit there basically are butted up to 23rd, but I drive into that area subdivision
Mhm.
to get off the main corridor to drive into those, so we don't have this major traffic jam
Right.
at that point, or
Right.
stacking of cars. And maybe that's a benefit too, because those are a challenge right there along that frontage road, stacking cars and turning the intersections to get in and out of there.
Yes,
Then
definitely.
too probably has some merit,
Mhm.
I would gather.
Yeah, definitely provides an opportunity to consolidate those access points and take some of the turning activity off of that main corridor.
Okay.
All right, well, once you all have a chance to review things more closely, we would definitely welcome your feedback on that topic. But otherwise, no major changes are proposed. There was discussion for the flex commercial district to update that front yard maximum to the requirement for the light industrial district. So we are considering carrying forward the yard setbacks in the light industrial district for the new flex commercial district. Since a lot of the areas that are proposed to be designated as the FC were developed under the LI district standards.
You're using floor area ratios someplace in this, and just not, you're not going to see it tonight, but somewhere in here.
We are not proposing to utilize floor area ratio.
So no floor area ratio differentiation.
Right. We have, in our experience, found that can be a tricky concept for some folks to grasp. It can be hard for staff to communicate those requirements, and it doesn't always lead to the type of development that we're looking for. So we have found controlling height and impervious surface coverage as being sufficient to controlling floor area ratio. But welcome your ideas if you think floor area ratio is
Just curious.
a benefit for the community. All right. So getting into the calculating dimensions. So for lot width, we're proposing that be measured at the front setback line rather than at the front lot line. This helps to accommodate curved roads. So it's hard to measure that straight line at the curved road, but much easier to do at that front setback line. height, so as that mean elevation of the finished lot grade to the mean elevation of the roof. For building coverage, that's the portion of the lot covered by principal and accessory buildings or structures. While impervious surface coverage is the portion of the lot covered by surfaces that impede infiltration of rainfall into the underlying soil profile. So that would include primary and accessory structures and buildings, walkways, driveways, pools, etc. All right, so this goes back to your question about those older areas of the community. How do we accommodate the variety of development we see there? So that would be covered under the exceptions and adjustments section. So we're caring for a bulk of the standards that you have currently, except those for lot area and width and front and or street side yard exceptions. So we are proposing for different ways of calculating those required setbacks, or lot area and width, based on whether there are 3 or fewer built up parcels along the block, or if there are 4 or more. So if there are 3 or fewer, perhaps 3 of the lots where the houses were knocked down and a church built a parking lot. There's not a whole lot of development pattern to mimic in new development or redevelopment moving forward. So there'd be different calculations for that circumstance versus if there are 4 more front-facing parcels. And these numbers are definitely up for consideration, something we want to talk to you about. So we make sure that they are working for the community, but this would provide that flexibility so that if a new house is built, it's not 20 feet ahead of the house next door, so that their side yard is the other person's front yard. So it has some of that averaging effect. Moving into the permitted encroachments of required yards, the majority of this language is what you all have currently. We've just reorganized it into a table to make it a bit easier to read and get through. We are proposing now some changes to fire escapes, fireproof outside stairways, and egress window wells. In the code currently, they are grouped together with balconies. So we're proposing to split those 2 apart and have the fire escapes, fireproof outside stairways, and egress window wells only allowed in the street side yard, or rear yard. So they would not be allowed in the front yard, but they would be allowed in all districts. Whereas balconies would be allowed in all yards, only in the R4 district. I know it says R5, it should say R4. Then last but not least, ADA ramps. Currently this section says temporary ADA ramps. We're just proposing to take out the temporary and just accommodate all ADA ramps. All right, any questions on that before we get into uses? Okay. This is our use table. It starts off with our residential uses. So you all can see the single family detached is proposed to be permitted as of right in all of our residential districts, except for the R4, which is the high density residential. This is where we're really proposing the city prioritize higher density housing. So having a bit of a process involved in approving single family detached is our way of proposing that occur. Then for the manufactured home, proposing to allow those just like single family detached, but then for the mobile and manufactured home parks, if those were existing prior to the adoption of the UDC, we're proposing that they be allowed to continue as they are currently, if they meet the standards of the UDC, of course, but that no future mobile home parks or manufactured home parks would be developed. It would be more so the manufactured home subdivisions. Now we get into duplexes, townhomes, and row homes, the 3 types of single family attached housing that we're proposing be included in the code. So for the duplexes, those would be a limited use in the R1 and R2 and R4 districts, and a permitted use in the R3. Townhomes would be conditional in the R1 and limited in the other residential districts. And same thing for row homes. So we definitely want to get your thoughts on the appropriateness of the various densities of housing within the 4 residential districts. So for example, in the R1 district, should perhaps duplexes be conditional and townhomes and row homes not be allowed? Or is it as proposed appropriate? Maybe we want to go farther the other way and have the townhomes and row homes be limited uses as well. I definitely want to get your thoughts on that. And if there are written thoughts later on, that's great too. For the multifamily components, we are splitting out multifamily above ground floor. We see that as the most appropriate multifamily format in our non-residential districts. Then we're splitting up multifamily buildings between those that have 4 units or fewer or 5 units or more. So this is trying to distinguish between our higher intensity multifamily buildings and our lower. So the 4 units or fewer would be more akin to that missing middle housing scale, which we would want to allow more broadly than the much larger scale multifamily buildings. For institutional uses, not proposing a whole lot of change here, but you will notice these are some new terms that are capturing some of your current institutional uses. These are just based on some changes to Nebraska state statute that we want to reflect here. Any questions on residential or institutional?
Application, it looks like on the definitions. See now, L now is
level about staff capacity and whether it was realistic for staff to be processing all of these limited use permits. And similarly, a new temporary use permit is proposed for temporary uses. This would provide some tracking for the duration of temporary events, have some control over things like signage, facilities, that type of thing.
What would a temporary use be?
It's like a farmer's market, a fair, a block party, that type of thing. And then the cells in the table that you see highlighted in green have additional regulations, use-specific standards, and those are items that we will be reviewing with you all next week on Tuesday the 19th. All right, so moving into the place of assembly uses. So these are meant to capture the commercial places of assembly are meant to capture things like movie theaters, a lot of entertainment venues, and then the non-commercial places of assembly are places of worship, not-for-profits, that type of thing. So tax generating, non-tax generating. So this is meant to comply with the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act of 1996, which requires equal treatment of religious and non-religious uses. So for the commercial places of assembly, we're proposing that they be allowed based on the scale for indoor and then differently for outdoor as well. So the indoor commercial place of assembly uses, if they're less than 5,000 square feet, would be permitted more broadly than if they were larger, just so the city has some control over those larger spaces. Similarly, for our non-commercial places of assembly, differentiating those based on scale. And then for our non-commercial places of assembly that were established prior to the adoption of the UDC, future adoption of the UDC, we would like to continue to allow those as of right in the commercial and non-residential districts, but not see future churches come up.
If you want to talk about the background or the rationale between not permitting places of assembly, large places of assembly, churches in the industrial and commercial areas?
Definitely. So the idea would be to preserve our commercial and industrial districts for tax generating, employment generating uses that contribute to property tax, sales tax, et cetera, to really help prioritize those areas for what those districts are meant for. And then in our residential districts and the public, semi-public districts, that's where we want to accommodate those types of uses.
So that would say that churches would not be located in downtown.
Correct. If they're there, if they're established legally today, and they would be allowed to continue, but no new churches would be allowed to establish in the downtown.
If it's a catastrophic event, they would be able to rebuild. Is that
They
prior
would.
history, or
If they were legally established, then they would be able to rebuild. They would not be considered non-conforming, but no new churches, no new non-commercial places of assembly could be established. So we want to accommodate what's there now, but moving forward, have a different approach.
Oftentimes what we've seen are like the old Oriental Trading Company turned into a church. We see car dealerships or large businesses like that that have been turned into churches and thinking around those involved. And that really takes away from the character of the commercial district and even generate the commerce. Access to the tax.
Have churches that are renting buildings downtown and serve as a church. And so it's still generating funds because they're not buildings. They're
Right.
just renters instead.
That's true. It's a different, we have a renter, but in land use, we don't distinguish.
Yeah.
between those.
Right. Then for the recreation and amusement, we're just proposing to carry forward your current campground and personal campsite standards. Those were discussed at the expedited amendments way at the beginning of this process. We're just carrying forward those. Next for lodging.
Curious on the recreation, why we wouldn't allow that as RL.
I believe we are just carrying forward how they are allowed currently, but that's a great question. Is that something we want to consider in the RL
Yeah, I
district?
was thinking the exact same thing, all that land out there by the river is the perfect place for campground.
Okay.
So, yeah, we can-
Some of the ones we-
Commercial campgrounds and personal campsites, or one or the other?
So,
oh,
Both?
yeah.
Okay. Definitely. We can get that added in. Then for our lodging uses, carrying forward the lodging house use that you have currently, then proposing to split hotel and motel from one another. So hotels would be allowed. Currently, we're proposing motels not be allowed in the community. That's definitely a point of discussion with you all, whether we want to allow that type of use in certain areas of the community. We also like to discuss short-term rentals.
Hey, Jackie,
Mhm.
question here, trying to follow you with this handout. I got looking here, our RL is R2, 3, 4, and 5, but yet you've got L
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4. Am I interpreting this different or whatever?
So where you have R2, it should be R1, and then everything should be one number less.
Okay,
We originally had proposed an R1 through R5 residential district structure. And then Jennifer rightly recommended that the R1, what we are proposing be the R1, be the RL to be more consistent with how you had previously
I want to make
designated.
sure I'm following the same
Yep.
here.
It should be exactly the same on the table, except for the
The new- the
misnumbering.
numbers.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about the short-term rentals and the discussion we had?
Definitely. So in the meeting with the advisory committee, we had a pretty lengthy discussion on whether short-term rentals are appropriate in the community. And there's a lot of discussion that there was concern that perhaps with the new sports complex coming in, where there will be future events, tournaments that would draw in a lot of folks. The construction of the Port Authority that would bring in a lot of folks too, that Airbnbs, VRBOs could really take off and potentially limit the availability of housing in our already tight housing market. So folks were concerned about that. But they also saw the opportunity for homeowners to make a little extra money if those potential opportunities were to come to fruition. So there were some opinions on both sides. We definitely discussed some potential ways of addressing those concerns. So other communities will restrict the minimum duration of stay, so requiring that they stay for 3 or 4 days rather than just 1 or 2 to avoid the type of party houses that you might see. Requiring that the homeowner have that house as their primary residence, so you don't have people buying up second and third homes to use as vacation rentals, that type of thing. So definitely want your thoughts on whether short-term rentals are something we want to consider allowing in the community, something we want to regulate, and whether having a limited use permit would be the most appropriate way of controlling that.
my question about the limited use permit earlier, you said that would be done by the administration. So to the extent that the city wanted to have some restrictions or constraints, L doesn't get it in that regard because the administration sets their own criteria, I guess, is whether they're going to or not versus that the city's going to set some criteria. Airbnb here, these are the things.
So that's true.
And that wouldn't get you an L on this table here.
So there are standards, there would be standards because it's highlighted in green. We are proposing that there be some standards that go along with the short-term rental use. So staff would make sure that all of those standards are met. But you're right, it would preclude city council from applying additional standards on top of those base requirements in the UDC. Any other thoughts on short-term rental? Right. So moving into our next section here, retail. So we are proposing to consolidate a lot of your retail categories into these general retail categories. I got confused there for a second because some of the text got cut off here. Just says square feet are allowed. That should say general retail 5,000 square feet or more than 5,000 square feet. So it'd be the larger version of the general retail. So similarly to the non-commercial places of assembly, we're proposing to allow the smaller format more broadly than we would the larger format. We're also proposing to separate out three retail type uses: multi-tenant shopping centers, pawn shops, and wholesale establishments. So our multi-tenant shopping centers we don't see as being appropriate in the downtown commercial area, so that would not be allowed. It would be a conditional use in the neighborhood commercial area because there could be concerns about having larger scale shopping centers near our residential neighborhoods, and then would be a limited use in the general commercial district. Now for pawn shops, in many communities that we work in, there's concern that pawn shops are not a desirable use. It's something they don't want to see proliferate within the community. So we had separated that out from the general retail category and are proposing that it be prohibited throughout the community. There was discussion at the advisory committee level that perhaps that is something that should be allowed in some way, maybe in a conditional use in a light industrial district or in the general commercial district, to make sure we're not kind of calling out the pawn shop specifically or running into any type of legal issues with exclusion. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that, if we have any at the moment. Okay. Now for our service uses, you'll notice that we do have the general service uses established here, but there are several other that are being called out separately or proposed to be allowed differently than what would be allowed generally.
Question here. Gambling services, I don't see anything in any district at all. Does that mean we don't allow them or don't allow them everywhere?
So if the cell is blank, it means it's not allowed.
Now, at Keno, we got Keno in Fremont here. Been a big plus for Fremont, huh?
In every bar.
Yeah, and that's what I'm wondering about. Would that apply there in Keno? Would be gambling, I'm thinking?
Would fall under, yeah, they fall under the gaming service.
Okay.
So yeah, definitely a point of discussion. Is that something we want to allow in certain
Probably
districts in
gonna
the
have to
community?
take that into account, I think, in here.
And also the gaming machines that we're seeing now pop up in the gas
Oh,
stations.
sure, that too.
They're all over. That's
Yeah.
a lot of right now.
Yeah, so the question to you all is that something we want to see continue to proliferate within Fremont? Is that something that's maybe more appropriate in certain parts of the community than in others, maybe in the general commercial versus the downtown?
I know that Keno's been a big plus for the city of Fremont because they use funds for different groups here. And it goes through council for appropriation of those groups when those groups ask for the monies there.
Okay.
So I would suggest yes, to continue this.
I think it should be an accessory use.
Okay.
Because in all of the instances where we got dating services, it's not the primary use.
That's a great point. Yeah, we wouldn't want a standalone gaming services, use, but as a accessory to a gas station, to a bar, perhaps that is more appropriate.
If gambling on a larger scale was ever legalized in the state of Nebraska, we would have no provision for that in our community.
And that's similar to a lot of other states that are dealing with adult use marijuana, all those different types of things. Their codes don't address it now because it's not legal. But once the council is able to decide how they want to address those things, the code update would be required. So similarly for our office uses, we are distinguishing between office uses by scale, but we also have office above ground floor only. So we see that as being the most appropriate format for offices in the downtown. So that is permitted as of right. And then offices that are less than 5,000 square feet would require a limited use permit. So not a whole lot of hoops to jump through to get that ground floor office, but just that additional level of scrutiny to ensure that that's appropriate, but really encouraging or promoting those above ground floor office spaces. So moving into the eating and drinking use category. So the way that the city currently regulates restaurants is a little bit different than a lot of communities. So currently they require a conditional use permit in the downtown, which is where I think we would want to encourage as many restaurants as possible. So we're proposing to really allow restaurants much more broadly than they are allowed currently. We've established some new distinctions between restaurant types, bars and taverns, brewery, winery, distillery, tasting rooms, microbrewery, winery, and distillery, and then just a plain old restaurant. We also are proposing a food truck court. This is another topic that we wanted to get all of your feedback on. So this would be a permanent location that would have all the infrastructure needed to support multiple food trucks. There would be a single owner, a manager that would coordinate with the food truck operators to get those spaces filled. And it would be an opportunity for folks to go and try food from multiple different food trucks and then have more of an outdoor dining experience.
I have a question in the back of slide. if
Oh,
you
for
would.
sure.
Under the service category, we talk about ATMs and vending kiosks, and we're not showing any use in the downtown commercial district.
So that would be ATMs and vending kiosks as a primary use of the lot. So there's one, where's the one ATM that's the only thing on the lot? Can't remember the roadway.
There's one down on Bell Street. And then there's
Yeah,
one
I think the one on Bell Street is the one I'm
Are they
thinking
building
of.
that bank down here on Military? Are they building a new one down here by the drive-through, I believe? Just starting this out, and soon that's an ATM, I assume.
So it wouldn't restrict like banks from having drive-through ATMs if it was accessory to the building, but it would limit just having an ATM with a drive-through in your downtown.
But a business could incorporate an ATM to the outside.
Certainly.
And another question here about, we do have a couple of them in town, charging stations. Is there anything in any of this that we have to address where we can put those today, or?
Electric vehicle charging stations.
Exactly.
So we typically address EV charging stations in the off-street parking standards that would be included in I believe Article 5 or 6, the development standards.
Okay.
It's less common, well, especially now, but moving forward, it's anticipated to be less common to see, like we have standalone gas stations, to see standalone EV charging
Because
stations.
Fremont has public parking downtown, the city owns. We have one that's near the courthouse today, that's an active charging.
Exactly, so
station.
that's associated with parking otherwise.
Yeah.
It's
okay.
going to, because it's even the new batteries that charge up pretty quickly, it's still about a 20-30 minute process. So most folks would want to do that while they're doing their grocery shopping or while they're having a meal, rather than like a gas station now you just fill up and you go. So we're seeing those much more associated with uses within their parking lots rather than being standalone uses like a gas station would be.
point out on this slide, on the food truck court, we had a lot of conversation during the committee about that today. There was definite agreement that there needs to be some regulation, but the question was how much. And do you just allow food trucks for special events or a food truck specified food truck court, or do you allow food trucks to be parked in a parking lot?
Definitely. So we're proposing to address food trucks in two ways. The food truck court would be a permanent use of a principal use of a lot. We're also including food trucks as the temporary use. And that could be either something that's approved as a part of a special event, or be allowed, in a parking lot, sort of like we see them today. So definitely want to get your thoughts on how we should allow food trucks. I think a bulk of the discussion at the meeting earlier was on the side sort of against food trucks. We don't want to take away business from our established restaurants or brick and mortar restaurants that are contributing to the property tax base and are more established within the community. But then we also recognize the convenience that food trucks provide, the ability to kind of start up a new business. It's a much more low barrier of entry to start a food truck versus a brick and mortar. So there is definitely opinions on both sides of the court there.
In the limited use scenario, say in downtown, would they have to get a permit for every day or week they wanted to operate?
That's a great question. So for the permanent food truck court, they would just be required to get that limited use when they are establishing their food truck. The ins and outs of the various food trucks would not be something that Jennifer would have to approve a permit for every time. That would be a nightmare. But for the temporary food trucks, let's say the city wants to allow food trucks to be parked in parking lots if it's approved by the property owner, then there's different ways of accommodating that type of use permit. Some communities will say you're allowed to, it's an annual permit, you come in, you get approved, this is your location, this is who approved you. Other communities say you've got to come in here every single time, show the proof of confirmation from the property owner, got to show us exactly where you're going to be located, etc. So there's different ways of controlling that, and we can definitely have those discussions once we decide the best way of allowing food trucks moving forward.
It's kind of interesting that you said that what we're looking at here when you say food truck court, this is for permanent use, doesn't by location use. It makes some sense that you would have zoning for that. But if you're just talking about food trucks in general, which the discussion sort of covers as well, that's really not a zoning issue per se. It may be a public use issue, but it's not how has that become a zoning issue? Like I have a permanent location within the city versus I have a restaurant downtown. Those are zoned commercial. We're really not zoning
So
in anything that you're doing.
So food trucks, I can jump down to the slide. It's proposed here in the temporary use, along with farmers markets, seasonal sales, carnivals and fairs, those other types of temporary events that we might see in the community, where we recognize they may be more appropriate in some districts versus others. So large scale carnival or fair, we want to see that in our ag district or our public semi-public district. Where food trucks with a temporary use permit could be appropriate in a residential area for a neighborhood block party that may be occurring or a party that a resident is having. So I do think there is zoning applicability to regulating temporary uses like food trucks, but it is true some communities take those regulations outside of the zoning ordinance, outside of their UDC, and they will live somewhere else in their municipal codes. That is a good point. That's not the only way of regulating food trucks, for sure. Anything else on food trucks or restaurants? All right. So moving into the vehicle related uses, this is sort of the converse of the eating and drinking. So currently the city really broadly allows vehicle related uses throughout the community, even in the downtown area. And we're proposing that they be regulated a bit more throughout the community. So we are proposing in the downtown commercial and neighborhood commercial districts to not allow these types of uses at all. Those are areas that we want to be pedestrian oriented. We want them to be safe for families to walk around, and having these types of auto oriented uses can really be a detriment to that.
If they're already there established, you're not saying that they need to move.
No, we would never say you have to pick up and go. We're going to bring in our bulldozers and kick you out. But they would be considered legally non-conforming. So they wouldn't be able to expand. If they burn down, they would not be able to rebuild, etc.
A couple of examples of that that are problematic in my mind, I think, is Deerfield subdivision, apartment complexes, and just what our versus part of it. And if we were in, let's say, they don't have one to my knowledge, but if we were out at Boomstead, they wanted to be like a lot self-contained in what they wanted to do. This would say you can't do it.
Any chance those were approved through plan developments?
I don't think so. I don't think.
Okay.
But I'm not really sure. Bluestem, sorry.
Bluestem certainly was, okay. So moving forward, in new subdivisions, if they want to have that type of mix of uses, I think that's certainly something that they could be, that could be proposed as a part of the plan development process. But I think generally, most folks wouldn't want a car wash in their neighborhood.
Well, the difference being that the ones that Deerfield have, those are self-lawn based and not particularly noisy,
Sure.
contrasted to the one that went in on 23rd Street adjacent to residential property. That is noisy. I understand.
So maybe different scales or functions for car washes or different types of automotive uses we could consider as being more appropriate, perhaps within closer proximity to residential. Any other thoughts on vehicle-related uses? Right. Now, for our agricultural uses, we're really not proposing any major changes to how you allow agricultural uses currently. Those are primarily staying the same, but did want to point out that the animal feeding operation and concentrated animal feeding operation is proposed to be prohibited throughout the community, even in the ag district. Moving into industrial, again, not a whole lot of major changes proposed here. One new use that we are proposing to be included, though, is artisan manufacturing. So this would be very small scale craftsman, artisan type of work, typically leather goods, bakeries, small batch candy makers, that type of thing. We see that as being very appropriate in the downtown commercial and neighborhood commercial districts, a lot of storefronts. So you could use that storefront space for the retail component, selling all of your goods, have the back half of the unit be where you are manufacturing those goods. And it's a really great experiential retail type of use where you not only come in and buy your purse, but you see the craftsman making it. And it can be a real draw for folks to come down to the downtown. Any questions on industrial? Now for the utility uses, we are proposing to include solar farms and wind farms. Not a use that's being proposed in the community currently, but something that Fremont could potentially consider moving forward in the ag district. That would be a conditional use. We're proposing that be conditional use for both.
I'm sorry, can you go back one?
For sure.
Industrial in downtown, you're not allowing home improvement centers or lumber yards. What about a hardware store? Would that fall into that category?
That would fall under general retail.
Okay, and then how about body shops, cabinet shops that exist downtown today? Will still be allowed?
So that would be considered a major automotive repair, and we are proposing that not be allowed in the downtown. But that's definitely up for discussion for you all to consider.
So it would become a non-conforming use, right, to be allowed to consider.
Yep. Yeah, for existing. Okay. How about a cabinet shop, for instance, or?
Would depend on the scale. So if it's a smaller scale, artisan cabinet maker, that would be allowed in the downtown. But if they're really requiring a whole lot of space, they're using a lot of big industrial equipment that we see as more appropriate in the industrial districts. So the idea is to have, and then we'll get into it when we get to the accessory uses. We have artisan workshop as being something that could be accessory use to a residence. So maybe I'm manufacturing something in my garage. Then I graduate to the artisan manufacturing space. It's a little bit bigger. And then I would graduate to maybe a light manufacturing. So it's the different scales, different levels of manufacturing we see as appropriate in different areas of the community. Right now for our transportation uses, proposing to carry forward airport and heliport, helistop, and railroad use as you have them allowed currently. We did remove transit stop, transit station, and what was the third one?
Transit.
Terminal. Because those were uses that you see in really large scale cities, not so much in Fremont. So we didn't see those as being necessary to include in the table. It wasn't a use that we foresaw in the future. So now getting into our accessory uses, you'll notice we have accessory building and accessory structure separated out from one another. So we're proposing to have those permitted in all of our districts, but to have distinct standards for accessory buildings, which would be more like a garage, versus accessory structures, which are more like a shed. So we would differentiate that based on whether it has a permanent foundation and whether it requires a building permit to construct. So your accessory buildings, and we'll get into this next week when we go into the use specific standards, but we're proposing those are allowed to be larger, but you only get a limited number, whereas the accessory structures would be much smaller, but you could potentially get more.
And that's a little bit of control overall.
And building coverage, they would both fall under those restrictions. So next we have accessory dwellings. So these would be accessory dwelling units, also called granny flats or mother-in-law suites. So we're proposing that they be restricted or regulated differently, whether they are internal to the principal structure. So maybe it's the basement or the attic space has been converted into a separate apartment, versus whether it's a detached garage that has been converted into that accessory dwelling unit.
Question, what's the national trend on these accessory homes that we have today? I just seen a news article yesterday in the news that it seems to be more prevalent across the country for allowing these things. Is that what I'm seeing as far as, is that the fact?
Yeah, certainly. So majority of the communities that we're working in now, whether it's planning work or zoning work, are all discussing accessory dwelling units as a way of increasing the housing stock, so providing more housing options, accommodating multi-generational living situations. So perhaps the accessory dwelling unit is the mother-in-law suite, or in some communities where they're trying to encourage aging in place, the accessory dwelling unit could become the primary residence for the senior homeowner, and then they could rent out their primary residence and have that income coming in.
We do allow them in our code today.
Yeah.
We allow accessory dwelling units today. In all of our
I remember that was a push on a residential lake development we had a few years ago.
I don't know the history of it, but they are allowed.
Okay.
And these, we're just recommending that they be allowed a little bit differently than they are today. So if they're internal to the structure, permitted as of right, because it really is not going to impact the character of the neighborhood from the street level. You'd still have to meet all of the standards, all of the requirements of the code. But if it's detached or attached, there's a higher chance that it's going to be a visual impact on the neighborhood. So we want to have a higher level of control for those types of units. We're also included accessory retail. So this would be an accessory retail component. You see it a lot in like office buildings. They might have an accessory retail component, an accessory cafe, that type of thing. Artisan Workshops is what I discussed earlier. So this would be the really super small scale in my tinkering in my basement or tinkering in my garage, much more small scale than we would see at the Artisan Manufacturing. So this would be the very kind of the birth of the business, and then you would graduate and graduate and graduate, trying to really build up that entrepreneurship within the community. Drive-throughs is another big change that we're proposing in this UDC. So currently drive-throughs are addressed as restaurants, drive-through, but today you see drive-throughs associated with all types of uses, pharmacies, banks, etc. So we're proposing that they be considered accessory uses and then could be applied to all of the various types of uses in the community. We're proposing that those only be conditionally allowed in the neighborhood commercial and the general commercial district, so no drive-throughs in the downtown. Another area of change is home-based business. So currently the code has home-based business and home occupations distinguished from one another. We're proposing to only regulate home-based businesses, and then those home occupations, folks just working on their computer remotely for their company from home, would not require any type of permit. If Jennifer had to process all of the permits for all of the people working remotely during the pandemic, she would do nothing else. So we definitely want to accommodate the new format for so many folks that are just working out of their homes. They're not running the entire business from their home. That would be considered a home-based business, but just folks working at home would be allowed.
Back up to family challenge. 2, those are all limited to permit by director.
Mhm.
No public notice, no public comment, discussion, or whatever might be going on in my neighborhood.
I believe that's how things are allowed currently. I'd have to double check that to be sure. But I do know that there are some real restrictions at the state, and potentially the city attorney could weigh in on this. Some restrictions that the state puts on how we allow that type of use. Those types of group homes, et cetera, would be pretty strictly regulated by the state, and there are requirements to allow that in the same way we would our single family. Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. They're what, I'm sorry?
Daycare centers.
Daycare centers
Somebody
within,
having a daycare
okay.
house. So.
So I guess
they
the
are
question,
limited uses in, they are SR and AR today, and the conditional use in the UR. I think that's something we should certainly
Mm-hmm.
take a look at. Also, the way they're defined currently in the code, reversing state statute.
Right.
Which I think we ought to take a look closer, deeper dive, look at that.
for sure.
And then we also need to address daycare centers, I think.
Okay.
Also, could you, maybe I missed it, what's the difference between accessory building and accessory structure?
So the accessory building would be the larger scale, like a garage that has a permanent foundation, required a building permit to be constructed, whereas an accessory structure would be more like a shed, would not have that permanent foundation, would not require a building permit. Okay, so you can definitely take a closer look at the family childcare home 1 and 2, perhaps consider that as a conditional use. That's something we could propose moving forward. And then Jennifer and I will definitely take a closer look at the definitions and the way that those are regulated to make sure that we are doing that sufficiently. All right, so the next kind of major area of new regulation we're proposing is for our solar energy collection systems. So we're proposing canopies. You often see those in parking lots, so it'd be covered parking, but on the top of the covered parking would be the solar panels. We're also proposing ground mounted and roof mounted solar energy collection systems, those being allowed as of right in all districts, but having some standards. So it's not like my entire yard is covered in solar panels, be restricted to the rear yard. It couldn't be, 40 feet in the air. I'd have to follow, our building height restrictions, et cetera. Any questions on accessory uses?
Roof mounted on your house is okay.
Put on top of your pergola, for instance, you would not. Can't territory.
So the way we typically would write those standards is they'd be allowed on your accessory building or your principal building, not on your accessory structures. So moving into temporary uses, carnivals and fairs, proposing that those be allowed with a temporary use permit in the agriculture and public, semi-public district. Construction related be allowed in all districts except for the mobile home park. Farmers markets, again, temporary use permit in your commercial district and in the ag district. Food trucks, another point of discussion, definitely want to refine this recommendation and get your thoughts on exactly what type of food truck format we want to allow here in Fremont. In the residential districts, it would more likely be as a part of a special event that would be occurring within the neighborhood. They wouldn't just be coming and parking, in a multi-family parking lot. But you could potentially see that in our commercial non-residential districts, having them allowed in the parking lot of an established business with that business owner's permission. So any thoughts on food trucks at this point, or should we wait for your written comments later on? All right. And then for seasonal sales, those would require a temporary use permit in your commercial districts and then be allowed as of right in your agricultural district. All right, and then like I had mentioned previously, the downtown commercial district specific standards will be developed after we get your feedback on the downtown sub area plan. We definitely want to ensure that the standards reflect that plan very closely. And then the last thing we wanted to discuss with you all this evening was historic preservation. So there's currently a historic preservation overlay district, but it's not applied to any properties within the community. Even though some portions of the downtown are within a national historic district, they are not within the historic preservation overlay district. So the city has expressed interest in becoming a certified local government in the state of Nebraska, and that would open up the community to be eligible for additional tax credits, evaluation incentive program, and some technical assistance. So in order to become a certified local government, we would need to designate and then protect historic properties using a local ordinance. So we have the ordinance, we would just need to designate those properties. A historic preservation commission with at least 5 members would need to be established. A system to survey and inventory local historic resources would need to be maintained. Public participation would need to be encouraged. And then a staff person would need to oversee the historic preservation program.
It wouldn't necessarily just be limited to downtown. It's actually elsewhere.
Yes. Yes,
Maybe museum, for example.
exactly. Yep. And then we wanted to give one example of a certified local government and how they are meeting the requirements. So in Lincoln, Nebraska, they are a certified local government. They have a historic preservation commission. And they require a certificate of appropriateness for certain work of those designated properties. So if a building permit is required or a demolition permit is required, you are required to get the certificate as well. But if you're just doing regular maintenance and repair, you would not be required to get that certificate. So their process for the certificate, you would submit your application to the zoning administrator. They could issue a certificate of no material effect. So what you're proposing to do is not going to have any effect on the historic integrity of the property, so you're good to go. If they think it could have that impact, they would transmit the application to the Preservation Commission. The Preservation Commission would then hold a public hearing and issue a certificate of appropriateness or an exception on the ground of insufficient return or hardship, or they would deny the application. So we want to get your thoughts on whether a similar approach would be appropriate here in Fremont. And Jennifer?
The other thing that Lincoln does is that they allow a conditional use permit for historic structures, so that it could be, if you have, say, a house on Nye Avenue, and you want to propose that it can be used for an office, which would normally be allowed in a residential district. But through the historic preservation process, if there was not an adverse impact on the neighborhood, you could get a conditional use permit. I think one of the first ones they did that for in Lincoln was the Rogers House bed and breakfast years. Something that's been successful. I know in Lincoln it provides some flexibility, especially as you have buildings that
And we've seen that same approach being very successful in historic neighborhoods, especially. So allowing those really massive historic homes to be converted into multifamily. So they kind of divide it up into several multifamily units. It helps to preserve the exterior character of the single family historic property, but then the interior changes a bit. So you have more economic incentive to preserve those structures. So something to consider moving forward. And we'll look forward to your thoughts on historic preservation as you all are reviewing these documents. All right, so our very last slide here, plan development overlay district. So as we discussed, we are proposing a change to your plan development process. So this would reflect that. So the plan development overlay district would not have specific standards. The standards would be established as a part of the plan development process. But the standards that are finally approved would be based on the underlying zoning district. And then if for some reason the plan development were to go away, the zoning would revert back to that base zoning. So you wouldn't have to have the discussion of what should this be zoned if the plan development was no longer valid.
What's the distinction between plan development and plan development?
Old and new. So the plan development and legacy is the accounts for the plan developments that have been approved under the current plan development district. Moving forward, new plan developments would be approved as the overlay. For the airport overlay district, we're not proposing any major changes to the content of those regulations, but we are going to clean things up, reorganize the content a little bit, make it a little more user friendly. And then for floodway and flood fringe, we're not proposing any changes as of now, but there may be some amendments that the state makes to their standards that we will incorporate as they come out. Any additional questions?
Like to access the Wayback Machine. All the way back to Article 3.
Okay,
In particular, place of assembly, retail, and service. In each of those different areas, we're specifying.
Mhm.
Each case, there's 5,000
Right.
square feet. Is that gross square feet
yes.
or is it net?
That's a discussion that we definitely can have. We typically use gross just because it's easier to calculate. But there are circumstances like for parking, we typically recommend you calculate that minimum requirement based on a net floor area calculation. So we could use a similar calculation for these
So
circumstances.
when we're talking about buildings.
It's typically the gross floor area.
If it is gross square foot. as opposed to the square,
Mhm.
Footprint, let's say. In a situation like that, would we want to make reference back to the building code?
We certainly
that
could.
Deals with
Mhm.
those particular types of stuff.
We certainly could. That's a good idea. Okay. So if there are no more questions, that's all that I had for you all. So I thank you so much for your time this evening, and I look forward to presenting you the use-specific standards next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. All right, I would take a motion to first adjourn the city council.
I'll make the motion. Second.
Gibson. Yes. Ellis.
Yes.
Canna.
Yes.
Yerger.
Yes.
Sutrum.
Yes.
Eggman.
Yes.
Vaughn.
Yes.
Carried 7-0.
Motion to adjourn the planning commissioners.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second by Lathrop. Lathrop,
Yes.
Campbell,
Aye.
Horace.
We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. See you next Tuesday, right? Yeah. 4 o'clock for the joint. 4 o'clock.
A simple issue that you can research, it doesn't take an hour. I know, you're laughing at the opposite. Tyler was just kind of like, hell, he's like.
Yeah.
Read this section.
Thank God.
Oh.
It was below it. It was below it. It was she like she read as far as she needed to. Oh, it was in my mailbox. Oh, that's why. Like it's in my inbox, maybe. What do you want? You're like, so we get around the whole way.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is one of those that like.
Okay. Okay. They all fit in the front row.
I was gonna say it is a rich one, either people are like, yes, or they're like, that's a lot. It's too rich, yes. I was gonna say Claire loves it. He's I can do, I've taken this, but I don't.
All right, welcome everybody. Before we begin, we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I will officially open up the City Council regular meeting. The time is 7:02. The Opens Meeting Act is posted on the rear wall next to the agendas. This time we'll have roll call.
Please vote for roll call. 7 council members are present, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much, Tyler. Next is mayor's comments, and tonight it is my honor to recognize, we have two different groups of people here. First, I'd like to start and recognize Rich Rader with Rader Photography. I have gotten to know Rich. I've known him for a long time in our community. He's taken my photo. I think he's taken a lot of our photos. Rich has done an amazing job with our city staff, with our fire department, with our police department. offering his services over the years for free, not charging a dime. And our chief of police, Jeff Elliott, I want to read you this letter that he wrote in honor of Rich. Over the last 20 plus years, you and your business, Raider Photography, have provided the Fremont Police Department with personal and public photos free of charge. You have used your time, expertise, and materials to provide these for the city without any expectation of monetary compensation. The photographs that you provide allow for the Fremont Police Department to project a more professional image and are appreciated by the employees and the citizens of Fremont alike. Without your services, the Fremont Police Department would have no way to display their employees or publicize their equipment and events to display the department in a positive light. We, the Fremont Police and the whole city of Fremont, wish to extend you our heartfelt thanks for the service that you have provided for us for more than 2 decades. We consider your efforts to be indicative of true municipal citizenship, and we applaud you and your company. Sincerely, Chief Elliott. Well, Rich, would you please come up, accept this letter from Chief? Let's give Rich a round of applause, okay?
This is yours.
This is okay. Pleasure. Thank you. There you are, sir, signed by our chief of police.
Now, do I get to say anything?
Take a minute or so.
No, don't say that word. First of all, got a chief of police in the city, that's amazing. I have several letters over the years from him that I posted on my wall, thanking us for the service we've done. That's rare. We do a lot of, I'm gonna pull my own Paul Harmson. The pen that lays the biggest egg has a right cap, so I'm gonna do a cap. This guy here has come out and thanked us for our work over and over. And that's rare. The sheriff and the fire department. That's all. Nevertheless, thank you, Chief. Thank you.
Thank you.
We thoroughly enjoy working for these people. We respect our service people, the fire department, our sheriff, Dodge County, and the police. They know. And when this all started, you'll remember back 20, 25 years ago in the Fremont Tribune, they every year posted the pictures of the police department. They were mug shots. That's how this all started. They were terrible. Well, in our business, I saw this and I said, no, this can't continue. I got a hold of actually the fire department first. And we set that up and started photographing the fire department one at a time. And then got involved with the sheriff and also the city police department. And that is not something that they ever would always say. The appreciation that I feel is the fact that they let us do it. I can't imagine not serving this community in some way, whether it be our church, our citizenry, or our services such as police, fire, and Dodge County Sheriff. That I'd like to just I thank everybody here. Not that it matters, I'm sure my wife here gets all this. She won't. I'll brag one more time. We have been married 61 years. Same house on Main Street, that big can stuck house for 50 years. And we aren't moving anytime soon. The point is, we're established. That old car you see sitting out on the driveway, that 85 Tornado, that's not just because that's all we can afford. That's a statement of identity. You drive up Main Street, there it is, there's the house, all man, same color. That's called absolute doing perfect business in a sense with your advertising. Everybody knows that car looks street, that was great.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you for your service to Fremont. All right, now to our next group of fine young people sitting here in the chambers today. I had the honor to follow the Fremont High School girls basketball team this year on their record season. I know we all had enjoyed watching them perform and succeed. And it just really was an amazing record year. And you were such great representatives of Fremont, not only throughout the year, but also in the state tournament, and really gave lots of notoriety to our community. And I just want to say, first of all, congratulations on that. That's just tremendous. So I also had I have a proclamation. Before I get to that, I just wanted to mention, I thought I pulled up the article because I remember after the state championship game, there were some comments about the year. And one of them was, how the state championship game was kind of an up and down battle, right? And you guys really pulled it out in the end. And so what the comment was, and this is Kelly Flynn, head coach, says, this one felt like a 4-year journey because we were so close. These guys kept believing in themselves and the coaches, and it's just a great feeling. It really is. And so I love the quote, you just kept believing in yourself. You kept believing, you kept the faith. You did not give up. And I've played in a state championship game and been in some of those situations, and it can be easy to give up. It can be easy to let your guard down, say we can't do this, or all the lies that you hear in your head. But you didn't let that happen. You kept believing, and that's a testament to your coach, to your preparation, and to your hard work this year and representing our community. So what I'd like to do, and I'll bring you all up after this, I'd like to read an official proclamation from the city of Fremont. Whereas the hard work, dedication, sportsmanship, talent, and exceptional team chemistry of the 2022 Fremont High School girls basketball team has enabled these student athletes to earn a state championship title. And whereas winning the 2022 Class A state basketball tournament game on March 7th, 2022 brought honor to Fremont High School, the city of Fremont, Nebraska, on the local, state, and national level. And whereas Fremont's head coach, Kelly Flynn, and the entire coaching staff, team member, parents, faculty, and student body at Fremont High School were integral in guiding the Tigers to victory through their unwavering support. Now, therefore, I, Joey Spellerberg, mayor of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, do hereby recognize and heartily congratulate the Fremont High School girls basketball team for their tremendous achievement in winning their first ever Class A state championship. Congratulations. Somewhere. All right, congratulations. Congratulations. Absolutely. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
You're dismissed. Okay, cool. You're dismissed.
Say we start meetings like that every time, don't you think? All right, that concludes my comments. We'll move on to item 1, a motion to adopt the current agenda for the April 12th, 2022 regular meeting. Councilman Yerger.
I'd like to ask council to consider moving item 7 ahead of item 6 on tonight's agenda.
Okay, any other changes? Councilwoman Ganem.
Approve the agenda as modified.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we will move item 7 ahead of item 6. Is that correct? Okay. Cast your votes to amend the agenda.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Yeah, take a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Councilman Vaughn.
So moved.
Councilman Sukram.
I'll second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to public hearings, item 2. Resolution 2022-044, approving change in designation on future land use map from parks and open space to industrial on property generally located at the northwest corner of West Military Avenue and Business Park Drive. I'll have staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This request and the next 2 requests are related. This is a request for a change in the future land use map of the comprehensive plan, and it's associated with a change of zone and a preliminary plat. The current designation on the future land use map for this area is parks and open space. However, the property is commercially zoned and privately owned. As I did some research and found out a little bit of the history of it, it looks like in 2016, a larger area, this parcel and a larger area was changed to parks and open space. And the City Council Planning Commission meetings do not say why that change was made. Anecdotally, I've heard that it was to protect residents in the area. The concern is that if it's designated for parks and open space and we have no intention of using it for parks and open space, that could be construed as a regulatory taking, which we don't want to have occur. So we can't say that there is no use available for this property. We can't say it's going to be parks and open space if there's no intent to use it that way. And so we need to change, I think, the comprehensive plan designation at least to commercial. The request is light industrial, which is consistent with the land use to the north and is consistent with the request for the change of zone and the preliminary plat. And in general is consistent with the light industrial uses in the area. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? Councilman Yerger.
I know you send out notices of this kind of activity to areas within 300 feet or whatever. I'm interested in, because this is out on West Military, how many of those notices might have actually been distributed, you know?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I don't know.
I'm sure the properties to the north would have gotten notice, and
Yeah.
probably the
And we-
YMCA camp, and maybe Isaac Walton, beyond that. Did
Yeah,
anybody get
I'm not
notice?
sure. We are, we required to send notices within 300 feet. I always do 350 feet of the property, and then post in the newspaper. And we can either send the notification or post a sign. We try to do all 3.
I'm curious as to whether or not there was a comprehensive plan amendment application filed in this process.
Yes, there was.
It wasn't included in our packet material. Is there any particular reason why it wasn't? Was
I-
it fully completed?
Yes, it was fully completed. I don't include application documents as part of the backup. But a number of the maps that were included in this application are included in this document.
Well, at some point during the discussion, I may have a chance to deal with some of the questions that would have been answered had that document been included, because there are explanations as a part of the application that we'll probably get to discuss throughout the context of this particular agenda item. I found the document online. I thought, well, it would be nice if we had included that. As filled out by the applicant, we'd actually have the storyline that goes with the application. Recommendation that in the future that it actually be included so that we understand what the plan is.
Again, I generally don't include the specific form for the paperwork with any of these. It adds a number of pages of paperwork that really aren't specifically related to the question at hand. It's just the application form.
If it was onerous, I might understand that. It's only a 2-page document, so. All for now.
Any other questions? Thank you. I'll now open the public hearing.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. I'm Jeff Ray. I'm a planner with JEO Consulting Group on behalf of the applicant, who is also here this evening. We concur with the staff recommendations as we put forward on this project and looked forward to how this would potentially lay out, what would potentially work here, and working with the applicant. We felt that a use very similar to what's just directly to the north would be the highest and best use for this particular property, and would work out fairly well, as you'll see within the other applications that are before you coming forward with the zone change, as well as the preliminary plat to accommodate that vision for this particular parcel. The first step obviously would be to amend the comprehensive plan, future land use map, to make sure that those pieces are compatible. With that, I'll take any questions you have for me.
Are there any questions for the applicant? Councilman Yerger?
Since you probably filled this in, this was one of the questions that was on the document that I just asked about. How does the requested land use designation further the goal and objectives of the city's comprehensive plan? Specifically with regards to, I understand the discussion with regards to going from Parks and Rec to something else. I'm interested in understanding in going from Parks and Rec to industrial, perhaps rather than commercial as a part of your request, and how you feel this best serves the objectives of the comprehensive plan development.
Yeah, so as a planner, I feel that this best serves the city's comprehensive plan, as in furthering the land use goals of the comprehensive plan to create a space that's, or an area that's currently vacant, bring it onto the tax rolls, increase your tax base and your tax valuations. It's orderly growth within the community. It's not a leapfrog type development. It's creation on the existing, or it's development on your existing periphery. Would also be annexed into the community, utilize your public utilities, and part of your orderly growth over all of the community, while also providing a need here for the citizens of Fremont.
And do you have any specifics with regards to your request being industrial versus being able to be met under the commercial standard?
The vision for the property fits better under the industrial, similar to the adjacent use directly north of the property.
Is the intended use to be for warehousing?
The intended use is for, yes, for private warehouse.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Please state your name and address.
Yes, my name is Terry Gilfrey. I am with the Fremont Family YMCA as the interim director. We have discussed, I'm representing the board of directors. We feel Mr. Weesey is going to do everything possible as a good neighbor. We understand that it's a great what he's doing. He's going to do a lot of things for us, and the board has voted to accept his proposal.
Anybody else here to speak on this item?
Susan Jacobus, 1805 North D Street here in Fremont. I can appreciate the concern about adding usable land to the city to use. However, where this is at, there was a discussion a month ago. This is military going to your west, which is your State Lake recreational area, your Isaac Walton area. Is this really what you want along that path? Your trail system at some point tying into Ridge Road, going across Fremont, et cetera. Is this where you want this to lead to? Right now, you have very limited areas that could boast such a pristine area that's been developed for the State Lakes, Isaac Walton's, as well as the YMCA camp area. And regardless of good neighbor or not, I think Weesey runs a good business. He continues to prosper and add employee base and has been active in the community many years. That can't be denigrated in any way. However, the land use map in 2016 was considered to go do an overhaul. And then it was peeled back. There was a reason for that. It is now designated as Park and Rec. Whether that's appropriate or not is not necessarily for the discussion now, as are you going to develop as a city, but how much more green space are you going to lose along military in that area? Once you get over those tracks, what is it that draws people to our area? The Fremont Lakes, Isaac Walton's, even the YMCA camp. You don't have just a few hundred, you have thousands that come to our community every year to go to these lakes and partake of the activities there. Not just for a day or two, but for lengthy stays, and they spend a lot of money in our community. That also cannot be denigrated, nor should it be. Your traffic, as far as what this is going to bring and allowing more access onto military, the heavy truck traffic, is this what you see for military? Has there been a traffic control study? What about the widening of the street? With the further development, if this gets passed through, if this gets designated and you approve the development that's on the agenda later down, what kind of traffic is going to be added? Are you going to have to widen military? You're not going to widen to the south. The railroad owns that. It's going to take it to the north. What will that do to Isaac Walton's? The entrance in the area for the Y is farther off the road. And again, I can appreciate that this is very proximal to and adjacent to land already developed, but it's to the north. It's secluded off of military. It doesn't integrate into military. I would just ask that you take a step back. You look at that recreational aspect, look at your trails that are tying in, look at your traffic and the additional truck traffic that this would bring. Because at some point in time, you should be able to reduce the amount of truck traffic on there, because we have a southeast beltway that we are, with some partners, paying in excess of $30 million for as a community. And when the state completes the bypass going to the north, the bypass being the 4-lane, the old Highway 30 will then be an access road come out of those industrial areas. You can then choose to reduce traffic on military. It is now a rather pristine residential sleepy area for the most, with very limited noises other than the frequent trains. But when it comes to the lake user, they go to these campgrounds to rest and relax and have peace and enjoy their families, not to have heavy industrial truck traffic and not to have industrial development and not wanting to drive through an industrial area that's been developed. And the Dodge County Visitors Bureau, they had numbers that they had presented maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, about not just a few thousand, but the millions that get pumped into our city annually by these people that take advantage of the state lakes and Isaacs and the YMCA. This is our draw to Fremont, and I would ask that you protect it. Thank you.
Is there anybody else to speak on this item?
Ron Block, 1500 West Military in Fremont. First of all, I'd like to thank the Christensen family for selling this to Mr. Weesey. and for Brian Weesey to make this development happen. I'm the landowner to the north, and I welcome this project. This will generate about $4 million worth of tax dollars for our community when it's all built up. And we need more projects like this in Fremont. There's been a void of this type of projects for a long time. And I urge the council to approve this project and all the projects like it. Thank you.
Nick Benenato, 1723 Caliente Cove. I drive by this area 4 times a day. Everything on this whole section, other than the Y camp, is industrial zoning. This project would not bother me. It would not bother other people at the lake that I've talked to. I'm in favor of this project as well.
Anybody else here to speak on this item? I'll close the public hearing. Any additional comments from council? Councilman Yerger.
To follow up on something that was mentioned during public discussion. I don't know if the applicant's going to be able to respond. Maybe we'll have to take this up on the next agenda item that deals with this, but I am interested in understanding the type of traffic, the volume of traffic, whether a traffic study and plan was filed as a part of this so that we might know what the traffic volumes would be and what the impact on military might be as it comes into the city in light of some discussion that we've been having and maybe we'll be considering in the future about limited truck traffic on military, perhaps from the railroad tracks to downtown, because we're currently running semis through residential zone. And if this would contribute to more of that, I'm wondering if we can find out whether or not we're talking significant volumes. Otherwise, we can take it up in the next agenda item.
Is there any other comments from council? Councilman Legband?
I'm just gonna say, from what I've read and seen, I'm in favor of this, especially after hearing the neighbors saying they're in favor of it. Then I don't see how could you be opposed. So.
Any other comments? No other comments. I'd take a motion in regards to this item. Councilman Gibson.
I would make that motion to resolution 2022-044.
Councilman Sukram.
I'll second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 6-1, Mayor.
Moving on to item 3, ordinance 5610, change of zone from GC general commercial to LI light industrial on property generally located at the northwest corner of West Military Ave and Business Park Drive.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This is the request for the preliminary plat that is associated. Did I skip ahead one?
This is ordinance.
Change of zone.
Yep.
Sorry, I skipped ahead one. This is the request for the change of zone that's associated with the comprehensive plan amendment and the preliminary plat. The property is currently zoned general commercial. The property to the north is zoned light industrial and developed with light industrial uses. The property to the northeast is zoned general industrial and developed with general industrial uses. The comprehensive plan just was approved. Staff recommends approval and the Planning Commission voted 8-0 to recommend approval. This preliminary plat was reviewed by the Utilities Department and by the Public Works Department. The ingress and egress was reviewed by both. the traffic counts typically for this type of a use with the small warehouses, the small contractors' yards are much less than what would be allowed in a general commercial district. A general commercial district includes uses like restaurants, financial institutions, auto repair, car washes, other type uses that generate more traffic. If you think about the area along 23rd Street and the amount of traffic on 23rd Street, which is general commercial, and then you compare it to the traffic along Miramar, there's a distinct difference. I don't anticipate that this would have a lot of heavy truck traffic. It's lighter industrial uses. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? Councilman Yerger.
A couple of points. I agree with you that I think in this particular case, light industrial is better than general commercial relative to what you can do one versus the other in the area that we're talking. My concern in the previous item was whether or not we wanted to provide a land use of industrial versus commercial, because the commercialization of military might have been a better choice. But I understood the applicant to say, we want warehousing, and I also understand you can't put warehousing in commercial, at least under our current code. So there's quite a dilemma here as to what we're attempting to accomplish. I understand their concern. I understand some of the public concern with regard to the corridor on military and the attractiveness of what needs to be there for the state lakes from a commercialization perspective in our city. So I'm sensitive to all of that. I am interested, though, in following up in my earlier question about whether a traffic study was required and whether one was filed and or whether it was reviewed by the Public Works Director as section 11.31606 would seem to intimate.
I don't believe that Dave asked for traffic counts in this particular instance. We reviewed it with him in a pre-application meeting and he did not ask for a traffic study.
Do we have any idea what the traffic volume would be, what the size and types of trucks would be? This was an issue when we were reviewing the property that went in on South Luther with regards to the warehousing there and what type of truck traffic would be allowed and whether or not that needed to be light industrial or general industrial to allow for the types of trucks. So we didn't pursue or feel we needed a traffic study here?
Dave did not request a traffic study in this instance. This is not going to be, the proposed uses are not going to be like the ones on South Howard off of Morningside, where you have 2 trucking companies located in that particular area. These are more small contractor shops, man caves, I guess, for lack of a better word. I understand there are a number of individuals who are interested in pieces of the property so they can build their own buildings to work on their cars and their boats. And
the reason that I asked those questions
type of
about the
thing.
traffic and traffic volume and the types of trucks, et cetera, if I'm reading the plans correctly, this is a 60-foot width street in and out of this particular area. If that's accurate, that would imply more than casual use, some sort of heavy use. It's either trucks with trailers or semis or whatever. 60-foot width is an enormous width for a street. In at least in our code. Did I read the application correctly?
And actually, we might better be able to address the roads and stuff itself with the preliminary plat. That might be more appropriate than with the change of zone.
Okay.
But I think the applicant is prepared to be able to address the design of the roadway. I would point out also that the type C buffer yard is required along Military Avenue with this. So there will be buffering and screening.
Okay, I'll reserve some of the other questions that I have, probably more appropriate to put under the preliminary plat discussion anyway. So thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff? I'll now open the public hearing on ordinance 5610.
Yeah, Jeff Ray with JEO Consulting here supporting the zone change to light industrial. It was referred to earlier as general industrial. We are not requesting a general industrial. This is envisioned to be light industrial. It's really envisioned to be smaller units with trucks, trailers, those types of things, more like pickup trucks, not a lot of semi trucks. The roadways are obviously designed to accommodate a semi truck should one go down there, or a straight truck for delivery purposes. And I believe if you're looking at the preliminary plat, it's a 60-foot right of way, not a 60-foot road width. 60-foot road is pretty substantial. That's a lot of pavement and a lot of storm drain that we don't want to have to deal with, and nor would you. So really, it's envisioned that the zoning would allow for these warehouse uses, very similar as we talked to Mr. Block had referenced earlier, in the Miramar directly north. That will allow for contractors to have a place inside where they can keep their equipment, maybe have a small office or small restroom, those types of things. Or somebody could purchase it themselves for their own storage of their own personal camping and boats and those types of things. That I'd take any other questions, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you. You have a question? If you have one, he can come back up.
It's not so much of a question as it is, I'd like to give you some recognition in the fact that the previous agenda item was one to deal with the land use map. And now on this particular zoning issue, we've got that established. In the past, we haven't always done that. So I applaud you for bringing something with regards to the land use map first, ahead of the zoning request. Having then had that pass at the last agenda item, it would seem that we're pretty much locked into, this has to be a commercial, or not a commercial, excuse me, an industrial zoning. It either has to be light or it has to be general. It's not going to be commercial because now it doesn't match the land use map was just approved. But I do applaud you for bringing that procedurally in the first place in the order you did. So thanks.
Well, thank you. And what you probably don't know is that I sat in Jennifer's office 10 years ago, so I know how this works. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any additional comments from council? Councilman Legband?
If there are no more comments, I would like to make a motion to approve ordinance 5610.
This would be to hold first reading. Councilman Sukram?
I'll second that.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to item 4. Oh, thank you, Tyler. We'll have first reading.
An ordinance of the city of Fremont, Nebraska, amending ordinance number 5427 as it pertains to the zoning map to rezone the property generally located at the southeast corner of Morningside Road and Lauren Lane from PD Plan Development to SC Suburban Commercial, providing for repeal of ordinances in conflict herewith, providing for severability, and providing an effective date.
Now moving on to item 4, resolution 2022-045 for approval of a preliminary plat consisting of 19 lots on property generally located at the northwest corner of West Military Avenue and Business Park Drive.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This is the request for the preliminary plat for the 19 lots in the Copperheads subdivision. It meets the requirements of the UDC. The Public Works Director was satisfied. I looked at the roadway design, and in the teeny tiny print, you can see that the roadway itself is 36 feet wide. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? Councilman Yerger.
I do have a question for Jennifer. I have a question for Mr. Godekun for the record with regards to, he didn't feel a need to look at any traffic information, and he didn't opine in anything in the staff report. I guess I'd like to hear anything he has to say about the necessity or not of that. I would like to inquire though of Jennifer, whether or not, it looks to me that we've already done site clearing or started site clearing out here. And I'm interested in understanding whether or not sections of a municipal code have been in order relative to the tree removal permit, which might be required apparently under 11.8.13.08, and whether or not site clearing was permitted or allowed prior to preliminary plat approval, which we have yet to do. And do those things come into play? Is that a correct reading of those particular sections of municipal code? And how have we addressed that?
I can't speak to those. I am unaware of those specific actions at this point in time. I have not received a grading permit application, though it may have gone through, and onto the Public Works Department without my knowledge. I don't see every permit that comes through. Typically, I don't review a grading permit.
Okay, wasn't discussing grading, and maybe the applicant can address whether or not a permit was
Yeah, and-
requested before tree removal was
and we-
affected. Because
We do not have a specific permit in our office for tree removal. It may be in the code, but it's not something that I've had to deal with in my time here.
Okay. The applicant can confirm we have started site adjustment. I'm not necessarily saying they've done any grading, but we've definitely done tree removal. I assume that's accurate.
Is there any, we'll get, is there any other questions for staff at this point? And the applicant can come up and we open the public hearing.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Godican with regards to embellishing his staff report with regards to no traffic study was required for the record.
I don't know if Dave is here. I imagine the reason is because it's already commercially zoned. But
Is there any other questions for Jennifer while we're waiting on Dave from council? Okay. Councilman Yeager, you want to ask your question, please?
Yes. Dave, I was interested in understanding your report in here with regards to the preliminary plat. Didn't say anything about having performed a traffic study, whether one was filed, you felt one wasn't necessary and therefore not reviewed, and perhaps one's not. I'm not, but when you look at Municipal Code 11.30306, says review approval of truck routing plans to prevent trucks from traveling on public right of ways adjacent to any park or recreational areas. We are sandwiching this particular area that's being requested here for platting between the YMCA camp and Isaac Walton. And if you go further to the east along Military, we'll be passing by residential areas as well. So my question really was, did you feel a review was necessary? Or for the record, you felt a review was not necessary and therefore none was obtained and you're satisfied?
When I looked at this, there's two entrances into the subdivision, one off of Business Park Drive and one off of Military. And there's 21 lots, something like that, in their light industrial. So when we looked at it, when you look at Business Park Drive and you look at military, there's a lot of truck traffic on that street already. So the amount of traffic being generated by a smaller subdivision like this, because it's not going to expand into anything larger, they're limited in kind of the area landscape that they have. So I guess I just didn't feel it was necessary to go through the effort of a traffic study on this.
Thank you for putting that on the record.
Thank you.
I'll now open the public hearing.
Good evening, council. Again, Jeff Ray with JEO Consulting Group Planner. Again, this is envisioned to the 19-unit subdivision with 2 entrances with a new street would ultimately become part of the city and be annexed, connected to public utilities, and be able to then facilitate warehousing development on these 19 lots. As we get through the process here, get into the final permitting, or final platting and final engineering, those will obviously come forward and go through the Public Works Department. Then the necessary steps will take place for the construction to comply with your regulations.
Okay, any questions for the applicant on the preliminary plat? Thank you. Anybody else here to speak on this item? Okay, I'll close the public hearing. Any additional comments from council? Take a motion to approve resolution 2022-045. Councilman Sukram.
I'll make the motion to approve resolution 2022-045.
Councilman Legman,
I will second that.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to item 5, resolution 2022-046 to approve request of a revision to the preliminary plat of Sunridge Place in the vicinity of Sunridge Place Second Edition, consisting of about 28.58 acres. Of staff report.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This is Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This is a request to revise or replat the preliminary plat for Sunridge Place Second Edition. It's associated with the final plat, which is next on the agenda. This proposal represents a significant reduction in the density. What the developer is requesting is to replat the area to predominantly single-family lots and remove the multifamily lots that had been in the area. Planning Commission recommended approval at their March 22nd meeting with a vote of 8-0. Staff recommends approval. And again, this is a significant reduction in the number of multifamily units that and overall density that could have been built in this area. I'd be open for questions.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? Councilman Yurger.
Yeah, I'm hoping you can expand a little bit more. I think I understood what was in your staff report generally and what you just said with regards to the density. And from my review of the previous preliminary and final plats for this subdivision, it does look like what was removed and replaced was the apartment complexes on the south and west side along Jack Sutton Drive and the row homes, et cetera, that were north of those, which were significantly more dense than what's being put back. So as I understand the concept, yes, this is less dense.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's probably based on the amount of public input that we had when this was originally done. It's probably something that the public welcomes in that regard. Probably good for business from their perspective. Obviously, they wouldn't be doing it. So that's obviously probably a good thing. There won't be any apartment complexes then, as I read this in this particular area of. There might still be on the east side of the subdivision that's not yet being discussed, but in this particular area, there are no apartment complexes, only those that were in the middle section in the original platting.
That's correct.
you.
Well, open the public hearing. Seeing no comments, I'll close the public hearing. Again, any additional comments from council? There's none. I'd take a motion in regards to this resolution 2022-046. Councilman Yerger.
Make a motion to approve resolution 2022-046 for the preliminary plat of Sunridge Place.
Councilwoman Ganem.
Second.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
We'll now move on to item 7 is a motion to approve subdivision agreement and update to Sunridge Place Second Edition Replat 1 subdivision agreement.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. The amendment to the subdivision agreement is to switch out, put the proper maps in it and refer to the proper subdivision, the proper language. It's a simple fix.
Questions for staff? Councilman Yerger.
My only reason for putting this ahead of the final plat is it's a requirement to tie this into the preliminary plat. So I've always felt that subdivision agreements belong before final plat approval. I assume that on page 13 of the subdivision agreement, there's a full intention to fill it in the missing resolution number that authorizes this under subparagraph Q.
Yes, I didn't have the resolution number at that point in time.
Okay.
Thanks. I'll now open the public hearing. Seeing no comments, I'll close the public hearing. Any additional comments from council? If there are none, I'd take a motion to approve subdivision agreement. Councilman Sukram.
I'll make the motion to approve the subdivision agreement.
Councilman Legman.
I'll second that.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to item 6, resolution 2022-047, approving request of the replat of the Sunridge Place Second Edition final plat consisting of about 28.58 acres.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Jennifer Dam, Planning Director. This is the request for the final plat that is associated with the preliminary plat and the subdivision agreement that you just approved. Staff and Planning Commission recommend approval. I'd be happy to answer any additional questions.
Any questions for staff on the final plat? Thank you. I'll open the public hearing. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any additional comments from council? I take a motion in regards to resolution 2022-047. Councilman Yerger.
Make a motion to approve resolution 2022-047 for the final plat of Sunridge Second Edition.
Councilwoman Ganem. Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to item 8, resolution 2022-048, recommending approval of a Class C liquor license application of Simmerdown LLC, doing business as Simmerdown, 2712 East 23rd Avenue North, Fremont, Nebraska. Go ahead, Tyler.
Mayor and council, I received this application from the Liquor Control Commission. Notice of the public hearing was published on March 31st, 2022. It's for a Class C license. The police department reported on this. It's kind of a unique situation, a Class C, where they'll be serving drinks, but it'll be going out. And as long as they comply with state statute with regards to that, the police department report indicates that, you know, they would be providing a positive report, and the planning and zoning report was also positive. And I would request that you consider the application so that I can return it to the state. Thank you.
Any questions for staff on this item? Councilman Yerger?
Not so much a question, but a statement, and I want to thank Councilman Ellis for directing me to some actions of the state's governor with regards to COVID activity and the use of walkout or takeout alcoholic beverages from locations. And that led ultimately to the passage of LB 274, which is now state law that sets the stage for this. And so the concern about this being an establishment that just provides takeout alcohol is covered by state law and the license that they're applying for, which was a concern of mine from the beginning. But with that clarity, it seems like this paperwork would be in order for the request being made.
Okay. I'll now open the public hearing. Any comments from the public? Okay, seeing no comments, I'll close the public hearing. Any additional comments from council? If not, I take a motion in regards to this item. Councilman Gibson,
I'll make the motion to pass resolution 2022-046.
48.
48, I'm sorry.
Councilman Legban,
I'll second that.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to the consent agenda, all items in the consent agenda are considered to be routine by the city council and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member or a citizen so requests, in which event the item will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. Any items to be removed by council, staff, or the public?
Mayor,
Yes.
after speaking with our city attorney, I would like to remove and continue items 13 and 14 regarding Keno satellite operations to our next council meeting, just to allow for review of the contracts and the underlying contracts for the local.
Councilman Yerger,
I'd like to speak to item 12, please.
yes.
Susan Jacobus, 1805 North D Street, Fremont. I would like to have number 10 pulled off just for a very simple question for Jody. And then also number 16 for a short explanation for Mr. Godigan. Thank you.
Okay, I will take a motion to continue items 13 and 14. Councilman Legban,
I'll make a motion to continue items 13 and 14
to the next meeting.
to the next
Okay,
meeting.
thank
Be
you.
Fine.
Councilman Sukram,
Second.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
And I would take a motion to approve items 9, 11, 15, 17, and 18. Councilman Legban,
I make a motion to approve items 9, 11, 15, 17, and 18.
Councilman Sukram,
I'll second that.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to item 10, receive report of the treasury. This is the citizen want to ask their question this time.
I just had two very short, Jody, I promise. On there, you had noted that there was an airport fund. I didn't know if that was specifically city funds that are locked in there, if those were the private donations received for the future hangar building. And then my second comment or question was the ARPA funds. I believe at one time a number 4.6 million was stated. I don't know that that's accurate, but I see that we have just short of 2.1 million in that CD and wondered if there had been any funds from ARPA expended elsewhere. Thank you.
After we're done with public comment, if we could just have a council member kind of adopt those questions for the staff.
Thank you. Any additional comments from the public? Comments from the council. Council want to have to be council to ask those questions. Councilman Yerger.
I'll be happy to put the questions forth that were asked by a member of the public with regards to inquiry of Jody's report. If she could explain those two things, that'd be much appreciated.
Sure. Jody Sanders, Director of Finance for the city. I'm assuming that the question comes from page 196 of your agenda on the governmental funds page. And toward the bottom, you'll see of that page, about the maybe bottom quarter, you'll see where it says airport, and there's $307,000 there. That is in fact the donations that were put forward for the airport hangar that was to be built next to the terminal building. So those funds that a private citizen donated are sitting there waiting for the rest of the funds that we would need to construct that
FBO.
Well, it's the FBO hangar. The hangar is the word that I was looking for, sorry. And then on the ARPA funds, we have received $2.2 million of ARPA funds. The way that it was orchestrated was that cities would get the first tranche in April of last year. I would expect that we would be seeing the second tranche sometime April or May of this year. The difference between the 2.2 million and the 2,024,000 that I think that's what it says, 49 maybe, that you're seeing there. We did keep about $250,000 in the city general treasurer account for working on the audiovisual in this room so that votes could be viewed online. Some of the other improvements that we had talked about making when we were in a Zoom environment.
Okay, any other comments from council? Need to receive report of the treasury. Councilman Yerger.
Make a motion to receive the report of the Treasury and thank Finance Director for explanation.
Councilman Legband.
I'll second that.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to item 12. Resolution 2022-049, approving aerial applicator agreement with GFG Spray Services.
Dave Godikin, Director of Public Works. This is to approve an annual agreement that we've had with this company for the past several years to do crop dusting basically out of the Fremont Airport. They base their operations here for a couple of weeks and do crop dusting in the local area. And this particular company kind of goes around to different airports and operates out of different airports to be within a certain mile radius of their customers. It's a $1,500 fee. And in this particular case, because the agricultural market's a little bit volatile, sometimes they don't know at this time of year whether they're going to be doing crop dusting, because if the markets aren't conducive to it, the farmers might forego doing crop dusting, or it just might be a good season for the insects that they don't have that much damage. So they always pay at the time of service.
Questions? Councilman Yerger.
Not so much of a question, although I'll pose it as one because hopefully you'll agree. I pulled this off because my push to always have as much transparency in the resolutions as possible. I'd like to amend this resolution with your concurrence, Mr. Godikin, in the now be it here therefore statement to insert hereby authorized to execute a $1,500 calendar year aerial applicator agreement so that we know what we're actually authorizing for an expenditure.
Okay.
No problem.
No problem.
I'll make that recommendation at the appropriate time. If no count, if and others have a comment, we can make it later.
Okay, any comments from the public? Okay, seeing none, the amendment was to adjust the resolution to include.
I would just insert after the word execute in the second line of the now be it therefore resolved statement, the phrase a $1,500 calendar year aerial applicator agreement.
Councilman Vaughn,
I believe that's already covered, and I think that this is probably a clerical issue that doesn't need to be addressed or changed or modified.
is there a second to amend? Councilman Ellis,
Second.
cast your votes.
Motion to amend fails 4-3.
Okay, just take a motion to approve resolution 2022-049. Councilman Legband,
Make a motion to approve resolution 2022-049.
Councilwoman Ganem,
Second.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Okay, item 16, resolution 2022-053, adopting and approving the execution of an agreement to waive receipt of the non-primary entitlement funds apportioned to the Fremont Municipal Airport in fiscal years 2022 and transferring these funds to another Nebraska airport.
Again, Dave Godikin, Director of Public Works. This is in relation to the Fremont Airport, the terminal apron project. The city gets annually what they call the entitlement funds. And we had built up, and these entitlement funds are held for us at the Department of Transportation in the Aeronautics Division. And we had held our monies were being held for the apron project and through the continuance of the apron project. So we had kind of a good problem on this one where we came in a little under anticipated, and the amount of grants and state aid that we had towards this project overran, I guess, the amount that we were going to need. So we had an additional 85,000, where the amount is, but roughly $85,148 that were unused for this project. And so the only way we can keep those dollars is if we have another project in the hopper to be constructed now, basically, which we do not. We have projects that are up for applications in, but we do not have any projects that are active at this time. So we turn those dollars back in, and then these dollars that are used at another airport for a project that they would have, similar to what we did when we built the apron. The dollars that we had were not enough to do the entire project. So monies that were being turned back from other airports then were used on this airport. So it's a trade-off that happens every year throughout the state. So I guess I would take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Godigan? Thank you. Comments from the public?
Susan Jacobus, 1805 North D Street, Fremont. The reason why I had this pulled off is the summary of projects on there states that the total funds due the sponsor was 132,000 plus. And handwritten, it shows what was underrun. I just want an explanation of what was that 132,974, since that's roughly $47,872 higher and $85,148. I just want a very brief explanation.
Any other comments from the public? Okay, additional comments from council. Councilman Yerger.
Well, I'd entertain response to the public's question with regards to Mr. Godikin's addressing that if he could.
Again, Dave Godikin, Director of Public Works. I may need some help from Jody on this one because I don't see the monies that are returned to us or that go out on particular projects. But I would assume that that's dollars that because we were paying in for this project as it went. And so I assume that is dollars that we overpaid. The other dollars, the 85,000 is money that we never had, that was being held for us at the state. So that's kind of a whole separate tranche of monies there. I don't know if I explained that very well, Jody, or not.
Actually, what they're showing is the state had provided a grant for this project of $2,195,500. And then, but we only used $2,110,352. That's where the 85,148 overrun comes from. So it's simply an amount that was awarded to us, but was not used because we didn't need it.
Okay.
Okay. Questions? Take a motion to approve resolution 2022-053. Councilman Legban,
Make a motion to approve resolution 2022-053.
Councilman Sukram,
I'll second that.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on to new business. Number 19, motion authorizing mayor to sign contracts with Civic Plus for Civic Rec software and website, department header for Parks and Recreation Department. I'll have staff report from Nick Hansen.
Mayor, I do have a resolution I was able to print off that was received, so I do have that if you want to receive that into the record.
Well, I take a motion to receive the resolution. Councilman Yerger,
Motion to receive the document as laid forth by the clerk.
Councilwoman Ganem,
Second.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Go ahead.
Good evening, Nick Hansen, Parker, Director of Parks and Rec. Efficiency, functionality, and user friendliness. This is what we're looking for in this software. This is what we've been visiting with other municipalities with this kind of software, is those three things with Civic Rec Plus. This can bring us basically the functionality of being able to allow patrons to register, purchase or schedule facility rentals, park shelters, recreation programs, gardening plots, cemetery plots, campground sites, baseball fields, other venues from online. This is what this software is made to do. Brings us up to a little outdated software. We also have a partnership with Civic Plus already that does our city website page. These are modules that we can use through Civic Rec and their department header. This also puts a department header for just Parks and Recreation. If you've ever been to Google something when you're trying to look something up and you Google maybe Parks and Rec, Fremont, Nebraska, it pulls up our actual web page instead of going to the city web page and then going to Parks and Rec and then trying to click another 4 different links to get to actually a registration. Loses people's interest, loses the registration part of it. This also has the functionality. So if somebody actually wants to jump online at 9 o'clock and rent one of our auditorium rooms or Christensen Field, they would have that capability of to be able to jump online at any point in time, because this software has the functionality of being able to have a contract online, a waiver online, basically covers their credit card. It's encrypted, it's PCI compliant. That's the nutshell of Civic Rec for us. The challenge that we run into is we have sportsman software that was budgeted in. The financial impact for us is coming that we don't have Civic Rec budgeted in through this budget process. We did receive a $7,500 grant from CVB to start up our first year cost to help us start this as soon as we can. So the first year, we're looking at about $15,000 roughly to start the to start implementation of this software. Then the second year would be about 9,800, which would come to are basically the migration of the software, CivRec software that we'd be using, and then the department header that we would be using with it. Yes, open for questions. Oh, and this would actually be split up between our 6 Parks and Rec departments, budgeted into all 6 because they can all use this software.
Councilman Legman.
Yes, I'd just like to thank you for finding the program like this, because I've heard and having kids grow up through this, it was never easy signing up for Parks and Rec and all the other things. You had to stand in line, all the fun stuff. So I really appreciate you finding this. And I think it's really going to help. I know it's not budgeted, but you're working on that and I appreciate that, but it's really going to help the city. So I want you, thank you for finding something like this.
Questions for staff? Councilman Yerger.
Not really so much of a question, other than the handout that we received for the record is, excuse me, a resolution that embodies what's being requested for approval. And Mr. Hanson and I worked on this earlier in the day. He's made a final edit to this. This was reviewed by legal. It basically encapsulates in a transparent fashion who we're buying something from, what we're buying, and the amount that we're paying for it, and it's 2 individual agreements. So it just tends to lay out the clarification of that and how this was or wasn't fully budgeted and somewhat paid for with regards to the grant. So it's been encapsulated in this resolution, and I appreciate to Mr. Hanson's willingness to do so to make our work easier.
Any other questions for staff? Okay. Thank you. Comments from the public? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, any additional comments from council? Councilwoman Ganem.
If there are no other further comments, I'd like to move that we approve resolution number 2022-060.
Councilman Yerger.
Second that motion.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Item 20, resolution 2022-056, accepting and awarding the bid to JNR Concrete and Construction for the 2022 pavement rehab project. This time we'll have staff report.
Dave Godikin, Director of Public Works. This is a project that we do annually. It's our concrete rehab program. City staff goes out, engineering staff, and then street department staff, and complaints that we've received from the public. And we identify areas around town that have pavement that's in need of repair. These are typically rehab projects where we'll go in and replace panels, segments of streets, not the entire street typically. We've done intersections and things like that, but typically it's kind of a patchwork of repair in different areas around town. And then one of the other things we do is if we're near an intersection, then we'll go in and replace and build handicap ramps at the corners of the intersection as well. In this year, the budget was increased from previously $220,000 for rehab to $500,000. And in this case, we had another project that was on Pierce Street, south of Linden, that was on a paving project. And as we looked at it, we thought, well, maybe instead of paving the whole entire street, because segments of the street are in good shape, we would do a rehab there. So we requested with the finance director that rather than doing that as a project, we transfer that to the rehab project and transfer those monies that were budgeted with it as well. We received 5 bids for this project, and the low bid then was JNR Construction.
Any questions? Councilman Yerger.
Really have any questions? A couple of comments. I wanted to acknowledge what you just said with regards to being wise stewards of our funds with regards to if we don't need to pave the whole street, we can rehab it instead at a lesser cost. That's good business. So thank you for taking that up. The other thing that I would compliment you on is your resolution includes who, what, how much, and the lowest bidder, all of which are good criteria and transparent with regards to the preparation of resolutions. And I appreciate your completeness in that regard.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Thank you. Comments from the public? Seeing no comments, any additional comments from council? Councilman Yerger?
If there are none, I'd move approval of resolution 2022-056.
Councilman Legband?
I will second that.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Item 21, resolution 2022-057 to approve a contract with Shive Hattery Inc. to provide services to conduct a fire station feasibility and facility study.
Good evening, Todd Burnt, Fire Chief. What you see in front of you is a agreement to go into a fire station feasibility and facility study with Shive Hattery out of Indiana. What this study is going to do is do an analysis of our current fire station, which is 54 years old. So this sort of goes in hand what Matrix Consulting Group did with their long-range master plan. One of their goals in Matrix is to assess, do we renovate or build new? So this is to assess that feasibility of our current fire station, what we need to do moving into the future. The second part was to identify a recommended fire station and a phasing plan for the new fire station. And they would also provide some estimated cost of the construction. And this is also goes in hand with a long-range master plan that we did last year. One of the goals in that plan was to increase response time to eastern part of the city by adding a second station. That study said somewhere near in the area of Military and Luther, and just gave a general idea. So we actually need to maybe pinpoint where we need to put it. And also they would also probably come up square footage, how big of a land area that we actually need to purchase to move forward with a fire station. And another one is part 3, it was determine the integration of fire training facilities into our fire stations. I think that'll just make a little bit of our training a little bit easier instead of trying to find facilities. Sometimes we use homes for training. We may go to buildings to do some training. So if we can incorporate some of this into our facilities, it just makes it a little easier for us. The study will take up to about 28 weeks. Once they come with the final report, they'll actually come in front of the council here and give their final findings and recommendations and stuff like that. If you have any questions for me, I'll take them. Also, we should have a couple of representatives from Shive Hattery on Zoom. So if you have any questions about the study itself, I'm sure they'll be able to answer.
Questions for Chief Burnt? Councilman Yerger?
Again, I want to thank you for the information that's contained in the resolution, but I do want to ask legal counsel whether or not we need to make a statement in that resolution with regards to the lowest responsible bidder. It does say that they're qualified in the last whereas statement.
I
Doesn't say the
think on
lowest
this one, they were a
responsible
sole bidder potentially.
They were the
so,
sole bidder.
yeah.
Do we need to do anything other than that? Then I thank you for the thoroughness of your resolution with regards to who, what, where, and how much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chief Burnt? Thank you, Chief.
Sure.
Any comments from the public? Seeing none, any additional comments from council? I take a motion to approve resolution 2022-057. Councilman Gibson,
I make that resolution 2022-057 for approval.
Councilwoman Ganem,
Second.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Item 22, move to approve addendum to purchase agreement with Allo Communications for property located within the technology park. Mahav report from staff, legal.
Yeah, I can take this one. This agreement dates back to last 2020, actually. And I don't know if everyone remembers, earlier this year, we had to adjust the agreement with Allo to take over the interest that Dodge County had in the parcel, and that the city was going to be the sole seller of the property. And we've been working toward a closing with the change in the prior city administrator had kind of been facilitating this sale on our end, and then the director at Allo had been facilitating it on their end. Both those individuals no longer work at those respective organizations. So this pushed off closing. And so now with the title company involved, they wanted to clean up the purchase agreement. So this is an addendum to the purchase agreement that changes the seller to just being the city and modifies the legal description to conform with the plat that was approved earlier this year. And this would be once signed. The goal is to close on this property on Thursday, but we'll see if that's able to happen. So I'll take any questions.
Questions for legal counsel? Comments from the public? Seeing none, any additional comments from council? Councilman Yerger?
Don't have any comments unless other council members do. I would make a motion to approve the addendum to the purchase agreement with Allo Communications.
Councilman Legban?
And I will second that.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Moving on, item 23, council member Ellis item ordinance 5611, amending chapter 10, article 2 of the Fremont Municipal Code to include the regulation of street vendors. Council member Ellis.
Thank you, Mayor. This journey started several months ago after being identified by several vendors who were food vendors, stating that just the current situation that we have for food vendors to come into the city of Fremont can sometimes be a little archaic. I've spoken with Tyler about the situation where if a vendor were to come in and get a license, and then getting that license is a complex issue. You have to go through a lot of stuff. But then you have to essentially tell Tyler where you're going to be, what location. And then if you want to change, you got to come back to Tyler to scratch off the location. And so there's just been a lot of frustrations that was brought to my attention after meeting with several local food vendor truck owners. And so after several meetings, sitting down with them, and they did a lot of research for me. They went out to Omaha and several other cities and brought back a lot of good information as far as what other cities are doing. And so what you'll find in front of you this evening is something that it's the first reading, it's the first crack at maybe providing a little bit more friendlier use for food vendors to come into Fremont. But per our conversation this afternoon or early this evening with Hazel Lviv, I think us as a council have a decision to make whether we want food vendors to be regulated via zoning that was proposed by Hazel Lviv, or food vendors be regulated by municipal code that we have in front of us, or any code that we can. So that is going to be something we as a council have to decide. And I'm not sure, that was kind of sprung on us this afternoon as far as what it looked like for food vendors to be managed via zoning. Kind of blew my mind because most of the cities, or all the cities that we had researched had very strict municipal code definitions. And so that's what I like about this is this is going to replace resolution. It was written back in 2011. It's pretty bare. And so it gave, I have to commend our city clerk. He did the best he could with a resolution that was written back in 2011. The reason this is so long is because we set out all the regulations that are going to regulate food trucks. And these didn't just come from us. These came from other municipalities. And so what it would do is it would simply define what a food vendor has to do in Fremont in order to sell food to the citizens. And so very specific. This was presented to several members of our administration, including city attorney. He came back with a couple of recommendations. I've got a proposal here to change section 10-20 or 220 to add a penalty that as soon as we're finished discussing this, depending upon what we want to do with this, I can make the amendment. The other two suggestions by legal, I think, are up for discussion by the council as far as whether we want to leave some of the freedom in here for the council to make decisions later on, or we just take them out now and proceed with at least a first crack at helping define this process a little bit better. So it's been quite a journey, and like I said, I'm not married to this by any means. I'm just trying to solve a problem here, and we've got some representatives in the audience tonight that will definitely bring some faces to the issue. And so I'm going to leave it at that right now for the opening discussion. And like I said, I want this to be a discussion, and we can, as a council, need to decide how we want to move forward with this, whether it's ordinance driven or it's going to be zone driven. So thank you, Mayor.
Initial questions for Councilman Ellis this stage. Councilman Legban.
Yeah, I guess I really don't have a question. I don't see anything wrong with this at all. I agree with you. I just think maybe, and it's a first draft, I know that it's awfully long. And if you say you have a food truck and here's 8 pages you have to follow, I'd be like, you know what, forget it. So I would hope maybe we could simplify it a little bit. But otherwise, and I agree with you, I'd rather have it driven by us, not zoning, because that's first we heard about it was this afternoon. So I am in total agreement with you. I just would hope that as we worked through this, that we could simplify it a little bit.
I would agree with you. There are a lot of things here that we could probably go through. We've already gone through it several times, so this is a much parsed down version than what Omaha has. So if food vendors go to Omaha, they're going to get a book. So I agree that we should, as a council, read through this, and I agree that there are some things that need to be removed. But yeah, it's a first crack. So thank you.
Councilwoman Ganem.
Councilman Ellis, would you also share with the group here what you've received back from the BID and anyone associated with the restaurant business?
That's Hazel Levy brought that up as well. I'm a big proponent of entrepreneurship, of letting people have the freedom to kind of create something from scratch and then grow that in to something of existence. And so I think I had that slant when I was going through this, that I wanted to be very knowledgeable of those individuals that are starting a business. But I also understand that there are brick and mortar businesses out there that are starting their business as well. And so they're all on different scales. And so I think as far as the city goes, it's hard. I don't want the city to pick winners. I think we should try to give everyone a fair fight in making it, being successful. I myself am a restaurant owner. So I am, concerned that this is going to take business away from me. I hope it does, because that means the more people downtown and the more people eating out will be, what is the saying? The rising tide raises all ships. And so we did run it past a couple of people on the BID, and some of them that were in support of it were they're restaurant owners. So the reason it's so long is because we put regulations in here that says you can't put your food truck right in front of a restaurant, because so there's got to be issues like that we've gone to great detail to make sure that if you are a brick and mortar, you're still protected. You still got to compete. You're competing with other brick and mortars. So like I said, I think this is a good start, and I look forward to hearing from some of the citizens when we open it up to public. So thanks.
Any comments from the public? It's kind of hot in here.
Mayor, council members, Seth Coates, 1215 County Road X, Fremont, Nebraska. I actually didn't know much about street vending in Fremont at all until last year. My boys, we started a little snow cone business, and that was the first time I ever started investigating and looking into any type of codes or anything in regard to vending. And when I looked at other cities, and then I came across what we required here in Fremont, it was stark in contrast. I mean, a lot of other cities have their codes laid out. It's fairly clear. Resolution 2011-78 is what we have to work with. It's about a page and a half long. And to be honest with you, it's pretty vague. I mean, I've met with Tyler a time or two, and we've talked things over, and I'd say some of it's open to interpretation. Some of it it just isn't very clear. And so I agree with Councilman Ellis's assessment that, I mean, Tyler's been trying to, I think, work with something that's just imperfect, and it's kind of difficult. The way that it's written right now, for example, our business since last year, we've kind of changed. We moved from a trailer. We got a van now. We do snow cones out of a van. And we just met last week with the board for the Parks Department. And we're going to be doing some of the snow cones like in the parks and stuff for the kids. But for instance, for me to be able to operate, let's say we had envisioned perhaps going to a birthday party and doing snow cones for kids at the birthday party. Under Resolution 2011-78, that requires that I have a permit in one location in the city of Fremont. So I'm only permitted to be in one location. If I go to a birthday party across town and serve 10 snow cones, I have to come up. I have to get a permission letter from the property owner to be on their property. I have to be on private property. And then I have to submit a site plan to the city to show them where I'm going to be on that property. So every time I move the van just to serve 10 snow cones, I have to come up and file new paperwork and meet with Tyler, and we have to go through that rigmarole every single time. So it's not feasible. We're not going to be in business here in Fremont. We'll go elsewhere because we can't operate that way. I did see a draft of the proposal here of the new ordinance, and it is long. And be honest with you, it's more restrictive than the page and a half that we have, but it clearly lays out what the expectations are for vendors. Definitely, there's more for us to follow, but it's laid out and we can follow that. I think it's a fair ordinance. Like I said, it mimics, almost mirrors exactly to La Vista, the ordinance down there. It has a lot of parts in it from Omaha. Some parts of Omaha's they do get lengthy, and some of it just doesn't pertain really to our city. But I'm in support of the ordinance. It really lays it out well. And it's something I think that we can follow. One of the things, if you would, on the resolution 2011-78, one of the more immediate concerns that I have pertaining to that resolution is just that it requires 200 feet of separation between vendors right now. And it's a bit of a safety issue, to be honest with you. If I set up in a parking lot in the same location, I have to be 200 feet apart from the other vendor. And what that causes is a dangerous situation, because I'm selling snow cones and whatever they're selling 200 feet away, people have to cross between us through traffic to get from one to the other. And there's really no ability for us to be positioned there amicably, to agree to set up together in one location. We've attempted to do that, to set up together with another vendor. But right now the resolution prohibits it. But really, if we do set up, it just makes it unsafe. And so that's one of the pressing things of the current resolution, I mean, if we don't move forward with anything else, we'd like to see at least some of those things changed. So. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public?
Hi, Jennifer Fisher with Nick Street Eats, and my address is 2495 East 34th Boulevard. I just wanted to say I commend you guys for kind of looking at the situation also. Seth and I, we did a thing last weekend or the weekend before for United Way, and we were together in the same park, you know, within a pretty good walking proximity. And I think it just works out better. I'm not afraid of him being there if I'm there. I'm not afraid of, you know, being downtown if Glenn's there. I think it just kind of ups everybody's game and keeps us all, you know, on top of things. And I think it promotes people to come down. I think there ended up being 600 people in the park, they said that day. And so it promoted everybody coming out and being together. And that's really kind of what we look at as food vendors. We're just trying to feed people and make our community better and safer. I mean, it's just safer if we're out there, and we keep our eyes open on stuff too. And then we have a permit where we're downtown, and we're not in front of a restaurant, we're in front of some bars, but we get so many good comments about us being down there. They love us down there, and we're there right now at night when probably most of the other places are closing, but we've just enjoyed our time down there and talking with all the community members, and they love us being there. So it just makes it easier for us to move around too, kind of as a pop-up cart is what we wanted to be. And it's kind of hard to pop up places with the current restrictions, and it would make it easier, well, on us and other vendors to be able to just kind of move around the city and just let someone kind of know where we are, especially if we're on private property.
Any other comments from the public? We only get one shot at it. Sorry. All right. Any additional comments from council? Councilman Yerger.
Yeah, I have several. Of course, since this would become an ordinance, this is a first reading recommendation, I guess, as we're looking at this. But in looking at what we have before us for this mobile food vendor section, when I look at chapter 10, article 2, which started out as peddlers and solicitors, so this is in addition to that section, there are 10 subsections dealing with peddlers and solicitors. 11 or 12 subsections that are dealing specifically now with mobile food vendors. So that's not particularly onerous in the scheme of things. One might find that we need more succinct rules and regulations to cover food vendors than we might need for those that walk the street, peddlers and solicitors. So I'm not particularly uncomfortable with the length that's here. You do need to have definitions. They need to be refined. Licenses, when they're required, that needs to be defined. How you apply for them, that certainly needs to be defined. How you making a decision as to whether you issue or deny, that needs to be defined. Fees need to be defined. What do you do with renewals? These all seem to be appropriate subsections, regardless of their length. And so I think, you know, from that perspective, we shouldn't really have too much pause about it. I do think that there's something in here that, as I look at this, that I think is important. with regards to Councilmember Ganem's questions about the BID and others. Because as I look at what is in here in the special district sections, I could envision some communities like Omaha saying, we have these kinds of ordinances for our vendors, but perhaps we're not going to let vendors go to the old market area. Or we're not going to let vendors go to the Exarban area. You can go all over town, but you're not going there. Paragraphs that we have included in these drafts, as I read them, would give us some latitude to say, if we're concerned about the downtown BID, on Main Street in particular with the restaurants, then we might be able to make some additional adjustments here that says, well, you can be everywhere except you can't be here. But we haven't defined those yet, but the opportunity is in here to make those definitions because they're provided for in what's written. So I kind of like detail in that regards. I think it lays good foundation for us. And I know from my conversations with Councilman Ellis, legal has taken an initial look at this. So I think we're on pretty good ground for first reading of this. I think it sounds like it meets some of the needs of the vendors that have come to speak tonight. And I would encourage council to move this along in that regard, realizing that it's only first reading. But I would also encourage us not to get a red line pen and strike a lot of material out of here that might be extremely useful to us to help manage food vendors. Because I think we need to be diligent in how we allow this to occur in the city. And rules and regulations in municipal code is a way to do it. I also firmly agree, zoning is not the place for this. This, I think, really does belong in section 10, along with peddlers and solicitors. I think it's perfectly located. So I would encourage approval of first reading.
Councilman Ellis.
Okay, so what I heard from Seth a couple of seconds ago was shoot, I can't find it now. The special district, I agree with that it gives us the latitude as a council to do set stuff up in the future. So I'm not too concerned about removing that. What I would like to do is submit for a document is the section 10-220, taking the legal's advice and adding a true penalty to this. And so I would ask for this to be received.
Okay. Is there a second? Councilman Yerger.
Motion to receive or second?
Councilman Ellis. Okay, all right. So we had a motion. We got a second. We'll cast your votes, please.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Councilman Ellis.
Okay, so in that is section 10-220 simply just puts in a penalty that would allow the city to invoke if any of these regulations were broken. And so that just kind of adds some teeth to the ordinance. It's going to give people kind of a second guess before they start coming in. And again, I would encourage at least the first reading tonight, and then I would encourage, or I guess what I'm going to do is float this proposal to make sure that the public knows about it, the BID knows about it, and get input for the second reading. And then maybe also start working with Tyler to work on the application process. So just to try to have that by the second or third reading so that we could all agree that this is what the application looks like. Just from past experience, we know that sometimes our applications don't really say a lot or do a lot. So I just want to make sure the application is defined exactly what we need and no other information is on that application. So that's what I would encourage us to do as a council.
Councilman Legban.
I'm in total agreement of everything except, well, you're throwing in penalties and I understand that, but I'm just trying to figure out who's going to enforce this. And the police force is already busy enough. You know, who are we going to make responsible for going through these 8 pages or whatever and making sure all the steps are followed? So I'm not against this at all. I agree that it's time to move forward for first reading. but we need to figure out who's our enforcer, who's gonna be responsible, and it puts a little bit more responsibility on I think the police force right now, but I think it's a good move, and yes, I will move on to first reading.
Okay. Councilman Ellis.
That's a good question. I think these are going to be complaint driven. And I think, so if there is a complaint, that we at least give the person that's complaining a voice. And we do have CSOs now on the street that could take some of this off of the police officers and simply issue tickets to those that are. So there is definitely some things we got to get through this, but I think it's a good start. So thank you.
Councilman Yerger.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge legal's recommendation here is a fairly significant penalty for violating municipal code, which I do not disagree with. Actually, if you want to give some teeth to your code, this will do it. I do agree with what Councilman Ellis just said in response to Councilman Legband's concern. This would be a municipal code violation ticketable by CSOs. This would then become a pay the fine or whatever, or you could take it to court, of which we just hired legal counsel to prosecute the CSO complaints over at City Hall. So I think essentially on the back end of this, with the recommendation from legal, we're covered. And I guess if I was a street vendor, I wouldn't necessarily want to subject myself to this $1,000 fine. So I'm probably going to follow the rules. Paying a license and doing the things I'm supposed to is a lot cheaper than the fine. But I assume that was legal counsel's thought process all along, is get them in line from the beginning and you won't have the issues. So I think this is a good addition with regards to the penalty. And I think we can handle with the staffing that we already have. This just becomes another municipal code complaint.
Okay, Councilman Legman.
Make a motion to hold first reading.
Okay, Councilman Yerger.
Second the motion.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Okay, we'll have first reading.
Ordinance establishing municipal code, chapter 10, article 2, covering peddlers and solicitors and street vendors. And I think it'll be up, that title will be updated for our next council meeting. On first reading.
All right, moving on to item 24, resolution 2022-058, authorizing the notice of declaration of public nuisance and notice of condemnation to be sent regarding the structure on 1506 East Dodge Street.
Thank you, Mayor. This is pursuant to code. When there's a nuisance violation like this, this is the procedure to follow through with demolishing any type of property that has been deemed to be a nuisance. This is the first step. This property has been in severe disrepair since early last year. The property owners have been notified numerous times. So the first step here is to the city and the mayor by through this vote here today would authorize, and the code doesn't say who, but I just said authorize the city attorney to provide notice to the owners, mortgagors, landowners via certified mail and via publication that they are committing a nuisance and the property is in disrepair and dangerous to the health, safety, and welfare of the public, and that they will have a right to a hearing to show cause before the council as to why the property should not be demolished. So I can take any questions as far as the specifics with the property. There were letters sent on behalf of the city previously that are included in the packet that kind of explain what the issues are with the property. And it's my understanding these issues have not been resolved at all. So it's the first step in moving to demolish the property and assess the costs.
Okay, thank you, legal counsel. Any questions? Councilman Yerger.
No specific questions other than this is probably well past due. I did drive by the property. This is in my ward. I was actually appalled to see the
the state of that facility. If I was living next to it, I would definitely have concern. So if other council members didn't, it would have been good for you to take a look at what's here with regards to what legal is proposing needs to happen here as far as notification. So well past due, it seems like.
Councilwoman Ganem.
I drove past it as well too, and yes, it is in great disrepair, and I agree. And I was thinking of the people that signed the letters for the letters and everything too. Maybe they're old and can't do anything, or in a financial situation. And I know it's not our responsibility, but is there a way to inform some of the agencies and organizations that are helpful? Rebuild is one of them. Habitat for Humanity is another. United Way is still another. That they can be aware that this person is in trouble, basically.
Yeah, I know those organizations exist. The city has not specifically directed the property owners to those organizations. But as you can see by the correspondence, the owners have had plenty of time and notice of the issues with the property. So I guess from my perspective, we're on solid ground to go forward with the demolition. As far as the policy perspective of how we assist property owners in these types of situations, I'll leave that up to the council.
Councilman Vaughn.
We know if the property taxes have been paid up on this the last few years.
I do not know that. And that would be a good question as far as whether there's any care over the property, but that doesn't address the issues, I guess, with condemnation so far.
Any other questions for legal counsel? Okay, Councilman Yerger.
Just one with regards to making the determination about notice of condemnation. So did city inspection go out and determine in fact that this is uninhabitable, is not and is and cannot be inhabitable?
Yes, on multiple occasions. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any comments from the public? Seeing no comments, any additional comments from council? Councilwoman Ganem.
Just one more comment. I know we're on solid ground. I know legally we're on solid ground and it probably should be done. But again, there are some people that don't know how to ask for help or don't even know where to go. And I wondered if there's a process that we can implement that maybe we at least inform the agencies that could contact them.
Councilman Yerger.
If there's no other comment from members of council, I move approval of resolution 2022-058.
Councilman Legban.
And I will second that.
Cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Item 25, affirm emergency declaration by the mayor and the utility general manager for expenses in excess of the spending limit for repairs to Unit 8 turbine and turbine valves. I have a report from our utility manager, Jeff Shanahan.
Mayor, City Council, Jeff Shanahan, Utility Manager. Starting around middle of March, we started the turbine inspection on Unit 8. That inspection is conducted at about 40,000 hours of operation. Last week or mid last week, we found some problems in the turbine that needed to be addressed. I alerted the mayor that they were going to exceed our purchasing limit and that we were going to have to declare an emergency because we need to get these pieces repaired as soon as possible so we can get the unit back online for the summer loading. So we have a $30,000 and $120,000 limit for electric generation equipment. And the repairs, as you can see quoted in the packet we sent you, are going to exceed that $120,000 combined. So we ask that you affirm this emergency and we go ahead and proceed with the repairs.
Any questions for Mr. Shanahan? Thank you.
Thank you.
Comments from the public? Seeing none, take a motion to affirm emergency declaration. Councilwoman Ganem,
I move we affirm the emergency declaration for repairs to US turbine and turbine valves.
Councilman Sukram,
Also, okay.
cast your votes.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
Okay, moving on to item 6, executive session to discuss contract negotiations. Councilman Gibson,
I move to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing strategy with respect to threatened litigation.
no, Councilman Gibson, can you utilize the sheet that we have?
And that's the one I got. Oh. You changed. Sorry.
Go ahead from the
Okay,
start.
I move to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing contract negotiations and for the furthest reason that the executive session is necessary for the protection of the public interest. Yes, thank you.
Is there a second? Councilman Legband. Okay. A motion has been made and seconded to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing contract negotiations and for the further reason that the executive session is necessary for the protection of the public interest. Is there any discussion? Councilman Gibson, you're on. Do you have any discussion? Okay. The pending motion is to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing contract negotiations for the further reason that the executive session is necessary for the protection of the public interest. Cast your vote.
Motion carries 7-0, Mayor.
A motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing contract negotiations and for the further reason that the executive session is necessary for the protection of the public interest has been approved. Discussion will be limited to contract negotiations. No official actions or votes will be taken during the executive session. We'll now go to the back conference room.